Nome. She's due to speak in New York. Meanwhile, in Minneapolis, this morning protests have intensified following that ICE shooting. This was the scene in St. Paul when protesters pushed against lines of federal agents. Officers reportedly responded with pepper balls and could be seen restraining a number of people. We'll keep an eye on this developing situation for you. And now here's a reminder of yesterday's deadly incident as it played out on camera. This video we're about to show you is not graphic, but some viewers may find it disturbing. So you can see here an SUV on the right and an ICE pickup truck approaching on the left. ICE agents get out of their vehicle and order 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good out of hers. She reverses, then pulls forward and to the right. 3 shots ring out. Some witnesses said Good was trying to avoid the agent. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said Good tried to hit the officer in an act of domestic terrorism. For more, let's bring in now the CBC's Willie Lowry from Washington. Let's start with the protests in St. Paul today, Willie. The situation does seem to be escalating over the course of the morning. What can you tell us?
Morning, Arthur. Yeah, over the course of the last 2 or 3 hours, the situation has really been building and growing as tensions there mount. The protest is taking place outside the Whipple building. That's close to the airport in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and it's home to more than a dozen federal agencies, including Homeland Security, and it's where ICE agents have been deploying out of as they go out on their missions throughout Minneapolis, St. Paul. And there have been some really tense scenes. You can see on the screen there the police, or I shouldn't say police because they're federal agents, and that's a really important point to make. This is not Minneapolis police, but federal officers. They've lined up, creating a buffer, protecting the building from these protesters. There have been some very tense scenes. I'm just looking at them here. Right now, it's fairly calm, but you can see one individual talking to one of the officers, and there have been at least one fairly physical arrest, and we've seen instances of the agents using tear gas and other devices to disperse the crowd. You can see there they're physically detaining a protester there. They've physically shoved some as well. So quite a violent scene at times there in St. Paul.
And now, Willie, we are expecting to hear from Kristi Noem very soon in this hour. And we know that there have been 2 different versions of what has happened here. So let's talk about what we're hearing from the Secretary, from the U.S. President, and then from others.
That's right. One event, multiple videos, and 2 very different perspectives of what transpired. We know that President Donald Trump has posted multiple times on social media calling the killing, quote, justified, and his Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, accused the woman, Renee Nicole Good, of weaponizing her car. Let's take a listen to Noem.
ICE agents repeatedly ordered her to get out of the car and to stop obstructing law enforcement, but she refused to obey their commands. She then proceeded to weaponize her vehicle, and she attempted to run a law enforcement officer over. This appears as an attempt to kill or to cause bodily harm to agents, an act of domestic terrorism.
The Trump administration has used the term domestic terrorism or terrorist to, at times, label what it views as left-wing and radical agitators. State and local officials, however, are incensed over the administration's characterizations of events and the loss of life in Minnesota. Here is the state's Lieutenant Governor, Peggy Flanagan.
Renee Nicole Good should be alive. She was killed by an ICE agent, and the video footage that we have seen with our own eyes tells a very different story from what we're hearing from Kristi Noem and Donald Trump. This is outrageous, and we all should be incredibly upset by what we witnessed.
Those local officials clearly not mincing words and visibly frustrated by the presence of federal forces in their city and state. Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hare was speaking to CNN a short while ago, and he said that tension between ICE agents and Minnesotans had been building for weeks. Let's take a listen.
This is something that clearly has been building for several weeks in our community. And I have very publicly been saying that I have been concerned, both number one, that a tragedy would occur, that either a federal law enforcement officer or a civilian member of the community would get seriously hurt or killed. And also that such heightened tensions and so many emotions around these issues could lead to civil unrest.
And the police chief also made reference of what happened 5 years ago now. That was the officer killing of George Floyd. That event sparked citywide protests that eventually engulfed much of this country.
Willie, thank you for this. That is the CBC's Willie Lowry in Washington. Now, as we wait, of course, to hear from the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security in New York, we also want to take you to the scene where this all unfolded. Last hour, we spoke to Radio Canada's Azeb Volde-Georges. She's at the protests in Minneapolis, and she gave us a sense of what's happening today.
Well, I can tell you that earlier we were at the facility of ICE facility, and there were a lot of tensions. You can see ICE agents gearing up. A lot of people are furious about what happened yesterday. 37-year-old woman who died right here. You can see right behind me the vigil. And since morning, a lot of people are coming, bringing flowers. And really, one woman earlier was telling me, thanking her for pretty much sacrificing her life to protect her neighbors, to protect people who were targeted by ICE police officers. So here it's pretty quiet, pretty somber. People are still in shock of what happened yesterday. But earlier in front of the ICE facility, you could sense the tension, and also the fact that the Trump administration has been pretty much defending the agent, saying that he was just defending himself, that the woman who was driving the car was really literally driving towards him. And most people have seen the video, and this is not what they're seeing. Most people here are saying she was trying to leave the place, and then the agent just shot her. We will, of course, there will be the conclusion of the investigations. But here in Minneapolis, people are very much saddened by this, very shocked, and obviously they would like to have investigation. And as the mayor said yesterday, they want ICE to leave the city.
You know that right now you're at a memorial for the victim in yesterday's shooting. What are you seeing there? What's the scene like there?
Well, we're seeing more and more people coming here. I was just, you can see the crowd here. Let's talk to some people who are here, like Joe. Hello, Joe. Just to get a sense of the situation.
What would you like to know?
Well, why are you here today?
I'm a resident. I live like walking distance, and I just felt the need to come out and pay homage to this mother who's, her son died, and the son, you know what I'm saying. So, it's very tough for our community. I mean, we had this happen before, and I love this community. We're passionate people. We love we're very involved, and more so than many other communities. So we are, if one of our citizens is being killed, we don't take lightly to that. And I'm sad, and I've got a little bit of rage in me that I need to pacify, because I'm just pissed right now. And I think a lot of people who care about our community are pissed. We don't want an invading force. It's so un-American. All of this is so un-American to us. I'm somebody that loves our country, and I think it's just awful. It's just, it's sad. I especially, I've got people. She's from China. He's from Switzerland. And to try to explain this to them, it's mind-boggling.
And the reaction of the president, Donald Trump.
I'm disgusting, just disgusted. It's almost like he wants to inflict more pain. I mean, anything that comes out of his mouth feels like it's so insensitive, so maybe thought, but in a very distorted way, so I don't understand it.
Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you very much. Back to you. So that's pretty much the general mood here at the vigil where the young woman died yesterday.
That's Radio Canada's Azeb Volde-Yorgis in Minneapolis. Now, as you saw, people are quietly paying their tributes to Renee Good alongside a sidewalk. The mood is somber, but tensions are mounting and many unanswered questions are still lingering. We now turn to CNN's Brian Abel with more from Minneapolis.
I do want to set the scene for you a little bit of what we have seen so far this morning here. Over my shoulder is the vigil to Renee Good, the 37-year-old mother of three that was killed here yesterday by an ICE agent. Her vehicle coming to rest right there. That area at one point had blood-soaked snow. We've seen some stains here in the streets as well that might possibly be related. So there's been very much a change from how that scene ended to what is now, with candles still going, people coming here throughout the morning, paying their respects. So it's been kind of a quiet time here in this area. Part of that, the reasoning for that, is because of what the community has been doing. You're going to see a lot of people walking here, but just beyond them, underneath those street lights, you'll see a group of people and maybe a fire pit and a vehicle sitting there. The community has come together in all directions stemming out from this intersection to create barricades, Arthi. And why they're doing that, they tell me, is because they want to make sure that they can prevent cars from coming in to any potential protest that may or may not happen here, and use that vehicle as a weapon for ramming, which interestingly enough, maybe we can say, is what the federal government is accusing Renee Good of doing, using her vehicle as a weapon. So this community is making sure that they are creating an environment that's safe for them. They are not leaving it up to law enforcement, and that really does highlight the distrust here that this community has with certain law enforcement, particularly ICE, as we have seen signs up telling them in no uncertain words that they are unwelcome here. There's also signs posted on street lamps. One in particular shows an image of the ICE agent that pulled that trigger, saying, "We know the name of his victims. What's his name?" So that really gets to this idea of transparency, as well as the frustration that this community has at this moment, Arthi.
That is CNN's Brian Abel in Minneapolis. And a reminder, we continue to watch the scene in New York as we're expecting to hear from the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. No doubt she will get questions about this incident that occurred in Minnesota. For more, though, I do want to bring in the CBC's Hilary Johnstone. So, Hilary, as we look at the images of those protests that are growing, as well as the memorial, let's learn a little bit more about the woman who was shot and killed here.
That's right, because we are starting to learn a few more details about that 37-year-old woman. Her mother has been speaking with a local newspaper in Minnesota, the Minnesota Star-Tribune, and revealing a few more details about that 37-year-old. Her name is Renee Good. And as we look at this photograph of her, some of the other things we're learning was that she was a mother of three. She had two older children from a previous marriage, but then she also has a 6-year-old son who she shared with a military veteran who died in 2023, just a couple of years ago. We also know that she lived near the scene, and what you're looking at right now is a little bit of the aftermath of what we saw yesterday at that intersection after that shooting, after the 37-year-old woman was shot by one of those federal immigration officials. They lived, Renee Good, with her partner not that far away from here. Of course, we still don't know a lot about what happened leading up to that moment that so many of us have now seen in that video circulating. But on her own social media pages, Renee Good described herself as a mother, as a wife, as a poet, as a writer as well. And to that end, we do have a statement here that has been released by Dominion University, by its president. This was a school that she had attended several years ago in 2020. And this is what the school is saying today, saying, quote, "Indeed, this tragedy reflects the deep strain being felt in countless communities across our nation. As citizens, it is our duty and right to call call upon leaders and officials to restore civility in all facets of our lives, especially at the hands of those who are entrusted to protect and serve. And to that end, not only have we seen vigils like the one you're looking at from the scene, this was happening last night, but we have also seen protests in different cities around the country. There are more that are also anticipated for later on today in various cities throughout the United States. We've seen scenes like this with people holding handmade signs, holding candles as well. All of this in reflection of that 37-year-old woman who died. Now, we have also heard from some people who attended this vigil last night, including a civil rights lawyer who spoke with CBC News Network earlier today and shared some of her thoughts on what has happened. Here's some of what we heard.
From our understanding, Renee was simply there as an observer of ICE activity in the neighborhood and was attempting to drive off when an ICE agent got in front of her vehicle and opened fire, literally shooting her in the head. So they intentionally took a kill shot. You know, they could have shot a tire, but instead they shot a mother of a 6-year-old, a wife, and a poet.
Now, as Arthi was mentioning just a moment ago, we are anticipating that we are going to hear more from the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, coming up in just a little while. Again, here's a look at that podium as we wait for that. But yesterday, she described what happened in Minneapolis as an act of domestic terrorism. It is important, pardon me, to point out here that Renee Good was a U.S. citizen. And as far as we know, of course, still piecing things together here, was not sort of a target of any sort of enforcement action by those ICE officers. So certainly a lot that we still don't know at this point, a lot of details that are still being gathered, but important to point out that yes, she lived in the area. She had spent most of her life in Colorado, according to family members who have been speaking with American members of the press, but she was at this point a resident of that Tri-City area.
You know, we're talking about trying to find out what has happened. We know that FBI is currently investigating that situation, but this is all in the background of those protests as well that are taking place in the state right now. And we know that a lot of lawmakers are calling for calm. This is a state that knows protest well.
That's right. And to that end, where this happened yesterday, this is just a few kilometers away from where George Floyd was shot back in May of 2020. You're looking at a scene right now, which is outside the Whipple Federal Building. This is sort of near Minneapolis, and this has been used, that facility where you're seeing both protesters and member of law enforcement standing outside of right now. That building has been used as sort of a staging ground for some of the immigration action which has been taking place in the state of Minnesota. According to the Trump administration, they have described this as the largest immigration enforcement action that they have taken so far. Some 2,000 officers have been deployed to this area. We know, according to their own numbers, that some 1,500 people have been arrested. Of course, all of this in lead up to what we saw play out yesterday. And we have heard from both the Democratic governor of the state of Minnesota and also the Democratic mayor of the city of Minneapolis urging those federal immigration officers to leave. That was something that was reiterated once again yesterday by those two leaders in a very, very strong way. They have been calling for calm, but they have also, both the governor, Tim Walz, and then also the mayor of Minneapolis has said that even though they're calling for calm, that people do have the right to protest in a peaceful way. Now, certainly we have seen this become a little bit confrontational at times today. You're seeing a little bit of that play out right now. Pepper balls have been shot into the crowd at various points in time. We've seen lots of people holding signs saying things like "No more ICE," "Quit your job," "Justice now," that sort of thing. Here's a little bit of what we heard earlier from one Democratic Congresswoman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, about what has been happening in the state and in this city more broadly. Here's what we heard from her.
What we saw today was a criminal murder a woman and shoot her in the head while she was trying to escape and flee for her life. And I think what we saw today was a manifestation of every American's worst nightmare, which is their government turning into a tyranny.
So just a little bit of the reaction that we have heard from some Democratic lawmakers. Of course, we've heard a different story from some Republican lawmakers and from some in the law enforcement community, but certainly we'll be watching and listening for even more reaction today and following what happens with these protests.
Thanks for this, Hillary. That is the CBC's Hillary Johnstone. And again, a reminder for our viewers, we continue to wait for a statement from the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. And once that gets underway from New York, we will bring it to you. Meanwhile, U.S. Democratic leaders are condemning the Trump administration's use of ICE agents in Minneapolis, and they're calling for a full investigation into that shooting.
The killing of Renee Nicole Good was an abomination, a disgrace. And blood is clearly on the hands of those individuals within the administration who've been pushing an extreme policy that has nothing to do with immigration enforcement connected to removing violent felons from this country. We support the removal of violent felons from this country who are here illegally. But that's not what this administration has been doing under the so-called leadership of Kristi Noem, who's a stone-cold liar. There's no evidence at all that this was a justified shooting. So let's deal with the tragedy right now. She hasn't even been buried. Her family is grieving. She was a single mom and an American citizen. And we all are outraged by what took place in Minneapolis, and we will respond decisively.
I watched the video. You felt like your stomach was being punched. Looking at the video, there seemed no justification for what these agents did. There needs to be a full investigation at the federal level, although I have little faith in the FBI at doing a fair investigation, or DHS, but at the local level as well.
Those were some comments from Democratic leaders that are also calling for the ICE agent involved in the shooting to be prosecuted. Again, another reminder here that we are standing by to hear shortly from U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. We will have that live for you once it begins right here on CBC News Network. Stay with us.
Having them there was only making a difficult situation even more problematic, and one that, yes, they created themselves.
That's Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey responding yesterday after a U.S. immigration agent shot and killed a 37-year-old woman in her car. And this is the scene there this morning. People are protesting the killing of Renee Nicole Good. She was shot at close range through the front windshield of her car in a scene caught on video. The Trump administration said the woman was killed as she tried to run over the agent, but the mayor, as well as Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, reject that account. The incident is now subject to an FBI investigation. And we do want to again show you the scene in New York. We are standing by waiting to hear from Secretary of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem. She is expected to provide an update on ongoing operations to arrest and deport criminals, illegal aliens in New York City. That is what she is expected to talk about, but no doubt there will be many questions about what unfolded in Minnesota involving this fatal shooting with an ICE agent. Now, for a closer analysis on the video of the shooting itself, I do want to show you a segment from last night's broadcast of CBC's Hannah Mansing Tonight. Take a look at this.
We're going to show you a video captured by a bystander. It is graphic, and we want to show the full video because many people believe it conflicts with official accounts. You're going to see when the officer shoots, but you won't see the driver being hit. Okay, this footage shows a dark SUV parked on a residential street, immigration agents getting out of that silver truck, and an officer tells the woman in the vehicle to stop, but she drives off. And a second officer fires his gun, and you see her vehicle continues to go on and run into cars on the side of the street. The Secretary of Homeland Security quickly said the driver was trying to run down the ICE agent, who, she said, fired in self-defense.
You know, people need to stop using their vehicles as weapons. This domestic act of terrorism to use your vehicle to try to kill law enforcement officers is going to stop. And I'm asking the Department of Justice to prosecute it as domestic terrorism.
Okay, so let's take another look at the video in slow motion, a moment that the investigators likely will be focusing in on. Take a look at the officer in the back here. Now, at that moment, does he believe that the vehicle was headed towards him? Was he legally justified in firing into that vehicle and hitting the driver? This is in slow motion, of course. The shooting has sparked outrage on the streets of Minneapolis and from the city's mayor, who said this about the incident.
What they are doing is causing chaos and distrust. They're ripping families apart. They're sowing chaos on our streets. And in this case, quite literally killing people. So they are already trying to spin this as an action of self-defense. Having seen the video of myself, I want to tell everybody directly, that is bullshit. This was an agent recklessly using power that resulted in somebody dying, getting killed.
Okay, so that segment there again from Hannah Mansing Tonight. That was Ian Hannah Mansing speaking on his program on CBC News Network last night. We do continue to closely watch developments in Minneapolis following that shooting death of a 37-year-old woman by an immigration enforcement agent yesterday. Stay with us for the latest on all of this coming up right here, CBC News Network. The city of Minneapolis remains on edge after an immigration enforcement agent shot and killed a 37-year-old woman in her vehicle. It's still unclear exactly what happened because of widely conflicting versions of yesterday's events. Trump officials say the agent fired in self-defense, but the city's mayor says video directly contradicts that narrative. Meanwhile, this is the scene unfolding today in Minneapolis. It shows a standoff between an angry crowd and federal agents. The state's governor is calling for calm as tensions continue to mount. And one civil rights lawyer in Minneapolis says the deadly ICE shooting reopens old wounds in her city. Nikema Levy-Armstrong spoke with the CBC's Susan Ormiston earlier today. Here's what she had to say.
One of the things that I talked about was, of course, the abuse of power at the hands of the Trump administration, and also reminding people that we've been here before. I mean, this incident yesterday in which Renee Good was killed happened just a few blocks away from where George Floyd was killed in 2020. And so there's still a lot of open wounds in our city. And so most of the speakers talked about the resistance.
Okay, and we do want to take you now live to New York, where, as we mentioned, Kristi Noem, the U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security, is giving an update on ICE operations. Let's listen in.
On a rock in a park after hours, enjoying the evening together, these two criminals came and attempted to rob them, and it ended up where they bravely fought back. This officer defended himself and his friend, but not before being shot in the face and in the arm by one of these criminals. Immediately after, the men and women of the Homeland Security investigations worked with NYPD, leading to the arrest of that gunman in just 2 hours. Within 28 hours, the second assailant was arrested as well, and those individuals have been brought to justice. But those individuals would have never been in this country if they hadn't been allowed in by the Biden administration when they ignored our federal laws and allowed them to come in illegally. Now, the officer that was injured doesn't seek public attention. He wishes to remain anonymous, but he had a distinguished career and a legacy of service and continues to do so. But his life was forever altered by this heinous crime. His attackers never should have been in this country, and they've been protected and were protected up until that point by sanctuary city policies. In fact, they had long criminal rap sheets and were released by the Biden administration and continued to be released by leaders in this city to perpetuate crimes against the citizens that live here. During our investigation, we learned that these scumbags were affiliated with the transnational criminal organization, the notorious Trinitaris gang in New York. We began to target every single last person that is affiliated with them and recognized that they needed to be brought to justice. The American people deserve dignity, they deserve justice, and we deliver both. So we launched Operation Salvo here in New York City. Operation Salvo was a cooperation of the resources of CBP, HSI, ERO, and also the federal prosecutors from the Southern District of New York. The New York County District Attorney's Office also participated in this operation. We've arrested 54 individuals as a part of Operation Salvo since its inception just a few months ago. Those arrested are violent transnational gang members and affiliates associated with Trinitarios who are responsible for weapons trafficking, for human smuggling, for narcotics distribution, and for armed robberies. They had perpetuated previous violent attacks across the city of New York City. We have already removed not only many of these individuals that we have arrested, but over 60% of them have been returned back to their home countries to face justice for their crimes there as well. These arrests and these removals represent a significant blow to the criminal network that has been terrorizing communities and right here in New York City and throughout the United States. And that's our message to this administration, to this city, to the state, and to the United States, is that President Trump and his law enforcement officers that are entrusted to protect the American people will every day continue to keep America safe. Operation Salvo is just the beginning of a broader and a much more sustained effort to go after not only transnational criminal organizations and networks, but also illegal criminal aliens throughout the country. We are on offense. the Trump administration is using every single tool that we have to protect the American people. Sanctuary policies, whether they're here in New York City, whether they're in California, Illinois, or Minneapolis, if you are a criminal, illegal alien, we are coming to get you. We will arrest you. We will bring justice, and we will also bring safety to the American people. We are warning anyone, if you think you can harm an individual, a citizen of the United States, or a law enforcement officer, we will find you and bring you to justice. If you lay a finger on one of our officers, we will catch you, we will prosecute you, and you will feel the full extent of the law. In every single thing the Trump administration does, we put the American people first. Operation Salvo has proven that by taking 54 dangerous individuals off of our streets and protecting the people who live here in this city. Now, also, thanks to President Trump, we have 2.6 million people who have left our country who shouldn't have been here in the first place. They were here illegally, and over 650,000 of them were arrested, detained, and deported back to their home countries. 2 million of them left voluntarily. Of them were arrested, detained, and deported back to their home countries. 2 million of them left voluntarily, recognizing this was their opportunity to go home and come back someday the right way so they have a chance to enjoy the American dream. Of course, doing these operations requires brave citizens that are willing to serve their country, and we're excited by the amount of people who want to join the Department of Homeland Security in their efforts to protect the American people. And tomorrow is Law Enforcement Day, so I'd like to encourage all of you that when you see a CBP officer, an ICE officer, anyone serving in federal, state, or local who are pledging their lives and taking an oath to protect their communities and their country and the people that live there, that you thank them. Do something nice for them. Buy them lunch, give their families some support, and thank them for their service and their dedication to freedom and to liberty and enjoying the opportunity to sleep peacefully in our beds at night. Now, I'm pleased that I get to introduce several other speakers that will come up and share information on this operation with you. The first one is going to be Director Frank Russo will address and talk about some of the specifics of this operation.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Madam Secretary, we can't thank you enough for being here today. Your humanity, your compassion was evident to us the minute our officer got shot. You visiting him in the hospital, checking up on him every so often was really a clear indication of your care for our officer, and really inspired us to come up with this operation. I'm sure that the success of this operation is a direct result of your care, so thank you for that. I want to get something across to you all in a clear message. New York City is a safer city because we did not allow this attack, this vicious attack on our officer, to go unanswered and unpunished. Because Operation Salvo delivered clear, real, and measured results. Now, the best thing about this operation is that it was done the way law enforcement loves to do it. Quietly, discreetly, behind the scenes, often under the cover of darkness. And what that did was it allowed our officers and agents to go out there, to conduct surveillance, to do intel gathering operations, and to arrest these individuals without any interruptions and without any impact to civilians. That's the way it's supposed to be done. And that's the way we kept New York City safe. 6 months ago, our officer was enjoying a Saturday night in the park. And when he was attacked, it was an attack on all of us. And we realized we had to restore public safety and the rule of law. Our mission is clear at CBP. Our mission is to protect the homeland, safeguard the borders, and endure economic prosperity. But this mission was more narrowly focused. This mission was about protecting the citizens of New York and ridding ourselves of these horrible individuals. Now, we came up with the name Salvo because the name means a lot to us. Salvo, first and foremost, the term our officer received salvation that night. By the grace of God and because of the incredible support from the NYPD under the leadership of Commissioner Tisch and her team, who was out there picking up our officer and bringing him to a hospital. So we thank the NYPD for that. Salvo also references a term of simultaneous discharge of guns in battle. And that's what happened that night to our officer. And he was so courageous in getting shot in the wrist and in the face and still firing back. He's a hero to us, and he inspires us each and every day. And finally, we felt the need as a premier law enforcement agency with our partners to unleash a salvo of justice. And so by using intel-driven operations, data-driven targeting capabilities that are second to none, we went after individuals who are illegally here and many who have criminal records. It was an incredible operation done by working with our partners, realizing that these individuals were affiliated to the Trinitarios gang. And when we realized that, then we did what CBP and our partners do best. Get at the root cause of the problem. Go after these transnational criminal organizations by getting at their networks. And each and every day we would pick off one or two. And with our partners, with ICE, with ERO, with HSI, we used our mapping techniques, looking at individuals with criminal records, arrest warrants, removal orders, and again, picking them off one by one. We could not have done it without them, and it was an amazing success. We looked at businesses, residences, and community hubs that were harboring these individuals. The results speak for themselves. More than 50 arrests as a result of our efforts, all because of the partnership and the work that we did together. It was truly remarkable, and a sign that we will not sit on the sidelines. We will always be there to protect this city. I want to thank, first and foremost, the Secretary again, our Commissioner, our Assistant Commissioner, the Office of Field Operations, our Special Response Team operators, our task force officers, our Border Security Team, our Field Analysis and Intelligence units, under the leadership of George Pasiakos, Mike Firing, Dave Campos, and Carmine Borges, who did an incredible job of protecting the city and making sure that a Saturday night in the park is safe. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm now going to turn it over to ICRO Director Ken Gianallo. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. How you doing? My name's Ken Gianallo. I am the Field Office Director for ICE Enforcement Removal Operations, New York City. I first want to thank Secretary Noem for traveling to the city today and for her continued and unwavering support of our brave law enforcement officers. We are here today because of the abject failure of the New York City bail reform laws and sanctuary city policies. The tragic shooting of this heroic CBP officer was entirely preventable and is a direct result of those policies. What makes this case particularly egregious is both of these violent criminals had been in NYPD custody on multiple occasions. However, due to these sanctuary city policies and the politicians that prioritize politics over public safety, these criminal illegal aliens were repeatedly released onto New York City's streets to harm this brave officer. ERO New York City is proud to partner with CBP and HSI in this joint initiative to not only locate and arrest the two criminal aliens responsible for the shooting, but also to identify, locate, and apprehend their Trinitario associates. Ruthless gang members who engage in illicit activity and terrorize law-abiding New Yorkers. Together, we have arrested over 50 criminal aliens, many with felony convictions, including weapons offenses, drug offenses, robbery, assault, rape, sexual abuse, burglary, and larceny. Approximately 30 of those have already been removed from the United States, while the remaining are in ERO custody at this time. Communities with sanctuary policies suffer the most harm from criminal aliens. When local police release dangerous aliens into the community, they often reoffend in the same community that they are released in. And also, they stay in sanctuary city areas. In this case, the shooter demonstrates he would travel to another sanctuary city jurisdiction, which was in Massachusetts, where he had an outstanding criminal warrant for armed robbery. So to further their criminality without fear of consequences or repercussions, they will travel to sanctuary city jurisdictions, basically hiding in plain sight. They provide safe haven for criminal aliens. The lack of cooperation is unprecedented across the law enforcement spectrum, and rather than the city's stated purpose to protect the immigrants in New York and the citizens of New York City, these misguided policies allow criminals to roam freely in our city, in our country, subjecting New Yorkers and all Americans to unnecessary harm, which includes an off-duty CBP officer just trying to enjoy his Saturday evening in our great city. ICE will continue to uphold the mission to protect the city's residents by holding alien offenders accountable. New Yorkers should not have to worry about violent criminals roaming their neighborhoods because the local systems failed them. We always stand ready to work with our local law enforcement partners without condition and sincerely look forward to reestablishing mutually beneficial path forward for the safety of all New Yorkers to ensure preventable tragedies like this never have to occur again. Thank you. I will now introduce you to the Special Agent in Charge for Homeland Security Investigations for New York, Mr. Ricky Patel.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Ken. Good morning. As you just heard, my name is Ricky Patel. I'm the Special Agent in Charge for Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, here in New York City. It is an honor to join my esteemed colleagues today to say, when our partners call, we answer. No hesitation, no delay. That's the commitment HSI New York brings to every threat against our law enforcement family and to our great city. From the very first moments following the July shooting of our CBP partner, HSI agents alongside local, state, and federal counterparts worked relentlessly, day and night, to track those responsible. HSI personnel, in coordination with our local partners, apprehended the accused gunman within 2 hours of the shooting. We swiftly identified his alleged accomplice, whom we arrested shortly thereafter. In the days, weeks, and months that followed, together with law enforcement, we pursued every known associate of this violent migrant gang crew. We pored over every piece of evidence, followed every lead, and made it clear an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. Our unity is our strength, and we will never let criminals divide us. Our investigation led to the capture of individuals tied to violent transnational gangs, including associates of the Trinitarios gang that are responsible for weapons trafficking, human smuggling, narcotics distribution, armed robberies, and repeated violent attacks across the Big Apple. Their arrests deliver a major blow to criminal networks that have preyed on our New York City neighborhoods for far too long. This was only possible because of the unwielding and unwavering collaboration between DHS partners and those from the Southern District of New York, the Manhattan District's Attorney's Office, and the law enforcement partners from all levels. Investigative methods and interviews were conducted. We identified additional conspirators and expanded our reach. I am proud to say that the main targets and dozens of their associates have been taken off of our streets. But our work isn't finished. We will continue to leverage every resource, whether it's local, state, or federal, to root out anyone connected to this conspiracy and this violent gang. Leadership and teamwork remain the backbone of our success. HSI's mission is clear: protect public safety and national security by investigating and arresting the most dangerous criminal elements from our communities. Every day, we use our broad authorities to enforce hundreds of federal laws, targeting transnational criminal organizations from every angle. We will not rest. We will not back down. HSI New York will continue to disrupt and dismantle criminal networks, ensuring our city and our country remain safe. Thank you, and I now turn it back over to Secretary Noem.
Well, thank you, Ricky and Frank and Ken, for all of your hard work that you do every day here in New York City, but also for the rest of our country. With that, we'll open it up to any questions that you may have.
Of the 54 people, how many had pending charges or criminal convictions? And I'm wondering, ICE's own data in New York City shows that over the last year, between January and October, 70% of the arrests that ICE did in New York City had no criminal convictions or pending charges. Should New Yorkers expect that trend to change? That's higher than the nationwide average.
If you look across the nationwide average, we have 70% of the individuals that we've arrested and detained have criminal convictions or charges against them, either in this country or other. We're continuing to do our work to bring those criminal illegal aliens to justice. And ICE will continue to get up every day and do what they can to protect New York City. I can have Frank or Ken speak to if you know how many criminal convictions of the 54 had previous to this arrest that they had. I don't know if you have those data points with you. We can get those for you, though. Exactly. The vast majority of them, though, have criminal charges against them or convictions against them as well. Yes.
Where were the 54 people from? Were they all part of the news audios? And what's the immigration status?
Again, loosely affiliated to the Trinitarios. Want to make that clear. Through connections by connections that we made by speaking to them, understanding who they were, where they were operating out of, and contacts that they had on their phones. Immigration status, all illegals.
So this loosely connected mean they just knew someone who was in the gang? They were not members?
It varies. It varies spectrum from speaking to individuals associated with the gang to just having conversations.
Secretary, in October we saw mass protests and armored vehicles rolling down Canal Street. How do we ensure that we don't see another situation like what happened yesterday here in Manhattan?
What I would encourage everyone to do, and especially your elected officials, is to bring everybody together, to talk about partnerships and start working with ICE and start working with CBP as we bring criminals to justice. And many times your policies and the rhetoric coming out of elected officials has divided people and pitted them against each other. Our job every day, and what President Trump promised to do, was to protect every single American, no matter where they lived in this country, that he was going to make sure that we weren't going to have more victims in this country. And we are going to continue to do that each and every day. And I'd encourage the leaders in this city and your governor and in other cities and states across this country to work with us rather than opposing us so that we can continue to make our streets safer. Yes, right here. Hi. Yep.
This is not the only example, the one that you bring up today, of officers being attacked by alleged gang members in New York City. We also had those officers who were attacked in Times Square.
So we've been listening in to Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem as she's delivering an update on what the department calls ongoing operations to arrest and deport criminal illegal aliens in New York City. Operation Salvo, they detailed, has yielded 54 arrests related to what she called the president's mandate to keep Americans safe. And this operation was carried out, we heard, in response to the killing of an off-duty CBP officer back in July. And we heard it led to the takedown of people who are believed to be links to the Trinitarios gang in New York. What we didn't hear, and I want to bring in the CBC's Hillary Johnstone here, what we didn't hear is anything about the most recent incident here where a 37-year-old woman was fatally shot by an ICE agent in Minnesota.
That's right. There was no mention of that. We'll see if maybe they come back around to that at some point. But certainly quite remarkable that there was no mention of that given everything that's been going on. Just briefly here, we have one small update on Minnesota that we can share with you, and that is that officials say that the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office is no longer cooperating with them on that investigation.
Okay, so that's some of the breaking news. We'll have much more for you coming up right here on CBC News Network. Stay with us. Breaking news, the Trump administration is standing by the U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement agent who fatally shot a woman in Minneapolis. Welcome inside the CBC Newsroom. I'm Arthi Paul, and we begin in Minnesota's Twin Cities, where protests are intensifying after that fatal shooting of a 37-year-old woman by an ICE agent. This was the scene in St. Paul a short time ago when lines of protesters and federal agents clashed. Officers reportedly deployed pepper balls and could be seen restraining a number of people. We will keep an eye on those developments for you. But we do want to take you back now to New York, where Kristi Noem, the U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security, is giving an update after that ICE agent fatally shot a woman in Minneapolis. Let's listen in to her response to a question.
If you remember in that operation, what happened was our officers were out trying to get a car stuck out of the snow when they were surrounded and assaulted and blocked in by protesters that were inciting. He did follow his training because of an individual that was. This is an experienced officer who followed his training, and we will continue to let the investigation unfold into the individual and continue to follow the procedures and policies that happen in these use of force cases. But let's remember the events that surrounded what happened yesterday on that tragic situation was that these individuals had followed our officers all day, had harassed them, had blocked them in. They were impeding our law enforcement operations, which is against the law. And when they demanded and commanded her to get out of her vehicle several times, she did not. So we'll continue to allow this process to unfold and recognize that these law enforcement officers every single day put their lives on the line. They go out and do their jobs. They go out and this was an act of domestic terrorism, which is perpetuating. These policies and procedures that follow a use of force situation like this are continuing to be put in place. So this is standard operating procedure after every use of force situation, is that we follow these procedures and protocols. This situation is no different. Back there. Nope, this young lady right beside you. I'll come to you next. I would say that President Trump and his administration are focused on protecting people. So we will never telegraph exactly the numbers and operations that we have and where we will be focused on. But I think that when you see violent criminals that are taking advantage of American citizens and putting their lives in jeopardy, our law enforcement officers at DHS will always show up. Yes. I'll come back. I'll come back. Go ahead.
Secretary, the officer involved in the shooting yesterday, has he been suspended or is he still in the field?
The officer went to the hospital. He was hit by the vehicle, went to the hospital and received treatment, was released, and is spending time with his family now. Yes, sir? Yes.
In Minneapolis yesterday, you said the surge there would continue.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't directly say whether we can expect an ICE surge for civil deportation enforcement. Can you explain what a surge is? And
I won't describe in detail our law enforcement operations that we have. It's just puts our officers' lives in jeopardy, but they will be there enforcing the laws of this country and upholding the public safety needs that have to happen when it comes to enforcing federal law. You know, we've got thousands of officers there, and I'm not opposed to sending more if necessary to keep people safe. Back up here.
Officer and some of his background. How much training did he have? How much training in these types of situations did he have, even if he's from the region?
Yeah, I'm not going to get specific to this officer, but he's an experienced officer that has served a number of years, and we recognize that he acted according to his training, and we have expect that all the policies and procedures of review will be exactly that he acted appropriately to protect his life and the life of his colleagues and fellow law enforcement officers that were there and people that were surrounding. Yes.
I'd like to get your reaction on some of the rhetoric here in New York City. Mayor Mamdani responded to the shooting yesterday, saying that this is only the latest horror in a year full of cruelty. He called it an attack on us all, that New York stands with immigrants today and every day. Also, council members last night at the protest called this fascism. The New York City's public advocate, Jumaane Williams, said that your administration is, quote, doing the devil's work, and he asked New York City to stand up and show up. Quote, it's going to be difficult and there are going to be casualties. And the last comment that was made last night at the protest was from New York State Representative Alex Boros, also a Democrat. Quote, not only was the ICE agent's hand on the gun, but Secretary Noem's hand was on the gun. President Trump's hand was on the gun. What is your response to New York Democratic leaders, those particular comments, and the protesters that are outside?
I would say those comments are why we're standing where we are today. That kind of language and that kind of provocative talk, inciting people to take action and perpetuate violence in some cases is unacceptable, and especially of elected leaders. We have a responsibility to state the facts, to go out and enforce the law. Your mayor just said in that statement that he was going to stand with illegal people who have broken our law before he's going to put New York City citizens first. His job and why he was elected was to protect the people who live here, that had the opportunity to vote for him and have the opportunity to live in this city. They pay their taxes, they go to work every day, and instead the mayor in that statement chose to stand with illegals instead of those individuals who just want the chance to raise their families in New York City and have a part of the American dream. Yes.
Minutes ago, the head of Minnesota State Investigations Agency said that they had been cut out of the investigation into the fatal shooting in Minneapolis. Can you explain that reversal?
I'd like to know where they've been and why they're not out on the streets investigating all of these people that are harassing and inciting violence on law enforcement officers right now. They're allowing this situation to be volatile. They're not doing their work. They haven't for years, and maybe they should get to work a little bit on the unprecedented fraud that we've seen in Minnesota and in Minneapolis by people that stole from American citizens and diverted funds away from vulnerable people and programs and services that they needed and put it into their own pockets. Minnesota is a train wreck. It is corrupt, and it was under the leadership of Governor Walz and this mayor that they allowed it to happen, and they let criminals and illegals and people abuse programs and steal the money, and now they're allowing violence to go forward on the streets as well. I won't put a blanket statement out like those other individuals will. What I would say is I welcome them to come and help us. Come help us make sure that the streets are safe, that laws are enforced, and that we can do the right thing to make sure that American citizens come first. Yes, sir. They have not been cut out. They don't have any jurisdiction in this investigation. Yes, go ahead. I'm going to speak to this individual right here. Yes. Mm-hmm.
How do you respond to Americans who have been listening to your comments
Mm-hmm.
that this was an act of domestic terrorism, that the officer was...
Anytime you take something...
It is in direct contradiction to what they are seeing and watching in the multiple angles that have been released.
What I would... This vehicle was used to hit this officer. It was used as a weapon, and the officer feels as though his life was in jeopardy. It was used to perpetuate a violent act that this officer took action to protect himself and to protect his fellow law enforcement officers. So we'll let this continue to go forward and follow the same policies and procedures that every use of force situation does. But we've had almost over 100 times that these vehicles have been used to ram law enforcement officers and to do damage and to harm them. When you take an action and use a weapon to harm someone and to incite violence against them and try to cause them injury or death, then it needs to be labeled exactly what it was.
Do you believe the use of force in this instance was commensurate with the actions of that vehicle and the driver?
I would say that when these individuals use their vehicles to try to ram our law enforcement and to put their lives in jeopardy, that law enforcement officer has to make a decision to protect his life and the individuals around him as well. Yes.
What did you make of Tom Homan's comment yesterday that we should wait for an investigation before determining, as you have, that in this incident it was self-defense and that he felt that his life was in danger?
You know, I didn't see those comments, but from what I understand, he also put out a statement later as well. So I'll let Tom speak to that. But all of us are on the same page in the fact that this law enforcement officer followed his training and that he defended and acted in defense of his life and those around him. Yes.
ABC 7 New York. Two quick questions. First, you said these protesters have been following the ICE agents. Do you have a little bit more of a timeline, and can you share with us some of those other initial encounters prior to the fatal shooting? And then secondly, can you speak to the closure of the ICE office at Rikers by Mayor Mamdani?
There will be more details coming out as this goes forward in the coming days, and I'll talk more about that closure in the future.
Is there anything else? So can you say if there was how many times that they had been threatened, like how many other times they...
It had been ongoing throughout the day. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Whatever happened in Minneapolis, a mother of 3 is dead, an American citizen. Do you have a message for her family today?
Yes, absolutely. And I reiterated this yesterday when I had my press conference in Minneapolis. I asked everybody not to just pray for the officer, but also pray for the deceased family and her loved ones as well. It was a tragic situation that I hope we never see happen again. That's why I'm encouraging all elected leaders to work together so that we can be cooperative in getting dangerous criminals off of our streets.
Do you feel like that you go in with a lot of publicity about these operations? Do you feel like that needs to be revisited so that maybe you go in a little more covertly, or do you need to change the approach at all?
I would say that we have all different kinds of law enforcement operations ongoing with the department at all times. We don't telegraph what they are, the details or specifics, or where we're going to be operating. I would say that there's different tactics utilized for what's appropriate for the situation and the criminal activity we see in the city. Last question?
Do you know the details of Renee Good's harassment of ICE officers early in the day? Were any of those details shared with you? Because apparently it wasn't just that one incident, it was earlier in the day as well.
Yes, it was, and that will be a part of some of the details that we will be sharing in the future. Thank you. Thank you all for being here, and I appreciate you focusing on this operation and the 54 criminals that we have gotten off the streets because of the work of this team behind me. We thank all of them for their service and recognize that, again, I'll remind you, tomorrow is Law Enforcement Day. Please take the time to thank a law enforcement officer who's out there keeping us and our families safe.
Okay, so we have been listening in there to U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, and she was taking questions about the fatal shooting of a 37-year-old woman in Minnesota by an immigration enforcement agent. Now, Noem reinforced remarks that she had made yesterday alleging the woman who was in her vehicle weaponized her vehicle against law enforcement. Noem says this was an act of self-defense, saying the ICE officer was experienced and was following his training when he opened fire on this 37-year-old woman. Now, the woman was commanded, we heard from Noem, to get out of her car and did not. And Noem once again called this an act of domestic terrorism. We do want to go through more details of what we heard from the Secretary, but first I also want to provide more context about the incident that we're talking about here. So let's do that. With that, I want to take a look at video and how it all played out on camera. A reminder for our viewers, this video isn't graphic, but some may find it disturbing. Take a look. You can see an SUV on the right and an ICE pickup truck approach on the left. ICE agents get out of their vehicle and order 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good out of hers. She reverses, then pulls forward to the right. 3 shots ring out. Some witnesses said Good was trying to avoid the agent. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, as we just heard, says Good tried to hit the officer in an act of domestic terrorism. Okay, so now I want to go back to what we were hearing there from Noem. She says, in fact, she alleges that protesters were following ICE agents around as they were trying to carry out their work. I want to bring in the CBC's Hillary Johnstone. She was here in studio listening in to what we heard there from the Secretary, the DHS Secretary. Some interesting comments because she said he was acting, the agent was acting according to his training that he's experienced. There was a question about whether or not he was suspended,
right?
But he's at home with family. It was all we got on that.
That's right. That's what we heard from Kristi Noem, is that officer, according to her, went to the hospital after all of this happened yesterday because she says he was hit by that vehicle, but that he is now at home with his family. Kristi Noem also doubling down here on comments that, yes, we heard yesterday, calling what happened here with that 37-year-old woman, with her sort of the way she behaved in this situation, referring to that as domestic terrorism. That is something that we've now heard from Kristi Noem several times. She was asked how many years of experience this particular officer had. She would not go into details about that, only saying that he was experienced, and also saying that he followed his training, and said that she is confident that once all of this is reviewed, that it will show that he followed his training. That was what we heard from the Secretary of Homeland Security. She also said, Kristi Noem, that 37-year-old woman, Renee Good, was demanded and commanded multiple times to get out of the vehicle and did not do that. She referred to the way that ICE responded to all of this as standard operating procedure. She started some of those remarks on this situation by saying that ICE officers at the time were trying to get a vehicle unstuck, a vehicle that had become stuck in the snow. Remember that we still don't know know a lot about what had happened leading up to that video that Arthi was just going through. We don't know a lot about what some of those bystanders at the scene had been doing leading up to that scene that we saw play out in the video. But yes, according to Kristi Noem, that ICE officer went to the hospital and is now at home spending time with family. In terms of other news or updates that we have here, and Kristi Noem was asked about this, a few minutes ago we heard from officials in the state of Minnesota, so state officials, saying that after all of this had happened yesterday, a decision had been made to open an investigation into all of this, along with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI, and that they wanted this investigation to happen, to be coordinated so that they could investigate this in good faith. Remember that it was only a few years ago in 2020 when George Floyd was killed at the hands of a police officer not that far away, some 2 kilometers away from where all of this played out with Renee Good yesterday. And they said because of that, they wanted to have an investigation done that was transparent in good faith. But they say that they have now been notified that the FBI will be leading this investigation and that they will not have a role to play here, state investigators. They say that that will mean that they will not have access to things like case materials, scene evidence, investigative interviews that they feel might be necessary in order to conduct a complete and independent investigation. Kristi Noem was asked about that, and she said that state officials in Minnesota, where all of this happened, she said that they have no jurisdiction in this investigation, and she also denied that they were cut out of this investigation. So certainly a lot to be following as we go forward here, Arthi, in the hours ahead.
And for our viewers, as you're looking at these images as well that we were showing while Hillary was detailing more of what we heard from the Secretary, those were images of the protests that were sparked following this fatal incident. We know that there have been many. There have been clashes between federal agents and demonstrators as well. And the Secretary was asked on whether or not we might see a surge of law enforcement in the state as a result of that. She did not answer. She said that's part of our operations and we're not tipping off people as to what we're doing, but that may be the case. With that, though, I do want to pivot also. We heard a question about the woman, this 37-year-old woman, this mother who was killed in this incident. Let's learn a little bit more about her.
That's right. So 37-year-old Renee Good, we are learning a few more details about her from family members who have been speaking with local media in Minneapolis, in particular the Minnesota Star Tribune. This is a photo of that 37-year-old woman. We know from family members that she had 3 children, 2 older children from a previous marriage, and then a 6-year-old son who she shared with a military veteran, a veteran who died in 2023, that 6-year-old boy's father, and now his mother, of course, this 37-year-old woman who died yesterday after everything that we saw play out there. We have also heard, this is actually from her own social media pages, she has described herself as a wife and as a mother and as a poet and as a writer. We know that she lived not that far away with her partner from this scene. And this is some images from yesterday near that intersection where she was shot. We have a statement here that we can bring you. This is from a university that she attended back in 2020. And this is what they are saying today. The Old Dominion University. Indeed, this tragedy reflects the deep strain being felt in countless communities across our nation. As citizens, it is our duty and right to call upon leaders and officials to restore civility in all facets of our lives, especially at the hands of those who are entrusted to protect and serve. And this is a look at the vigil from the scene last night. And we did hear from a civil rights lawyer earlier today on CBC News Network who attended this vigil last night and spoke about Renee Good. Here's what we heard.
From our understanding, Renee was simply there as an observer of ICE activity in the neighborhood and was attempting to drive off when an ICE agent got in front of her vehicle and opened fire, literally shooting her in the head. So they intentionally took a kill shot. You know, they could have shot a tire, but instead they shot a mother of a 6-year-old, a wife, and a poet.
And of course, we've heard a lot of reactions from lawmakers, both Democratic lawmakers and Republican lawmakers as well. And we can bet, Arthi, that we will hear more reaction from officials throughout the day.
No doubt. Thank you for this, Hillary. That is the CBC's Hillary Johnstone. And we do want to stay on this story. There are a lot of questions about that investigation and where it goes from here. For more on all of that, I'd like to bring in Daniel Bruner. He is a retired FBI agent and the president of the Bruner Sierra Group, a forensic accounting and security firm. And he joins me now from Montana. Thank you for making time for us today.
My pleasure.
Let's start with the investigation. You know, we did have some developing news on that, particularly that the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension says that they are going to have to step out of this because of the way the FBI is taking over. What's your response to that?
Well, I think it's very difficult to hear, and it's difficult to hear, especially with that press conference that Secretary Noem just had, where she's asking for cooperation when ICE is conducting operations in New York City, Minneapolis, Washington. She wants the locals to cooperate, but when something happens like this, there is no cooperation from the FBI. I worked in New Jersey for 20 years, and some of my best partners were the state and locals, and there's always was transparency. If there's nothing to hide, provide all the information, provide the evidence, give them access. There are officers from the Minneapolis State Police, the troopers from each city that are embedded. They sit with the FBI agents. They're task force officers. The fact that they're being blocked out from any evidence from all the interviews is actually very difficult to hear, and it's unfortunate, because if there's nothing to hide, they would be granted access, and then if there was charges or not charges, then that would, we'd cross that bridge. But it's difficult to hear that. Because that is a developing piece of information, I just want to ask you a little bit more about that. So how might that impede the investigation or impede the credibility or damage the credibility of the investigation? Well, I think the investigation started off on the wrong foot, because when the individuals left the scene, if this was an FBI shooting, if an FBI agent was involved in a shooting, at that point, that scene would be locked down. It would be locked down for 24 hours. There would be no one coming in, coming out. Evidence response teams would be in there collecting all the evidence. Every person that was there on scene would be interviewed, because the incident happened fresh in their mind. It deteriorates over time. The individuals have now gone home, seen social media. Their recollections of what may happen has changed. So this investigation was impacted from the beginning. When they left the scene, within 2 hours, the victim had been taken away, the vehicle had been taken away, all that physical evidence was taken away. That is already impacted. At this point right now, they will be continuing to move forward. And the FBI, I have no doubt that the FBI agents on the ground, on the streets, are conducting the investigation thoroughly and 100% at the best of their ability. They will not be doing anything that will jeopardize the investigation. It's who is above them, is who is running up the chain of command, who will be revealing. They're the ones that are making the decision, not the street agents conducting that investigation. It's those in command that are making the decision not to cooperate with state and locals. So that's where it'll be good. So the investigation will move forward, but it'll be problematic, because if you had state and local partners, you'd be able to open so many more doors, so much more cooperation, more evidence, more cooperation from the locals. So it's much more difficult for the FBI to conduct the investigation without cooperation from the state and locals. And, you mentioned something there that I do want to pick up on. But before I do that, I want to ask you, what steps are taking place right now in terms of the FBI investigating the situation and getting to the bottom of what happened? Well, they're going to move forward. Like I said, this investigation started off on the wrong foot. But they will be moving forward. It's not like they haven't done an investigation like this before, moving forward with, from behind the curve. So they will be moving forward. They will be conducting interviews. They're going to try and locate every person that was there. Unfortunately, they will be relying on video evidence to say, okay, and they will contact that person. If this had been started at the scene correctly, with a shooting review team being flown in, FBI agents from Minneapolis division descending upon it, securing the scene, that would have been a lot easier. Now it just makes more difficult. They'll be looking at cellular phones. They're going to look at her tracking of the victim. Where she was going? Was she on her phone? They're going to, the individual, the agent who shot, he was on his phone. He was videotaping as he was crossing in front of a vehicle, which the training says you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't cross in front of a vehicle. His phone will be looked at. Everyone's phones should be looked at for digital evidence, where they were, who they were talking to, who they were texting, and to get into the state of mind of the individuals, both the victims and the shooters and the rest of the team. They're going to look at their training, how they were trained, when was the last time they were trained, when were their firearms qualifications. Everything should be looked at with a microscopic level to find out where this all started, how it began, how it happened, and then all that evidence collected, a decision should be made. Daniel, there's so much to discuss here. I'm going to have to leave our conversation here, but the investigation is ongoing, so I know we will talk again. Thank you for your time today. Anytime.
That is Pleasure. Daniel Bruner. He is a retired FBI agent in Montana. We know that local officials are also demanding the immediate removal of federal ICE agents. With emotions running high and many unanswered questions still lingering, I'm now joined by CNN's Brian Abel in Minneapolis at the site of a memorial for the victim of that ICE-involved shooting. So, Brian, what's the latest where you are?
Well, Arthi, I do want to tell you that the morning here in Minneapolis and the greater Minneapolis area started with protests and protesters clashing with federal agents this morning near the airport at a federal facility. That is very much in contrast to what we have seen here at the scene of this shooting, where people have come to remember the 37-year-old mother of three that was killed, Renee Good. It has been peaceful. It has been somber. There has been members of the immigrant and Somali community coming here, handing out food, people just talking, gathering. There's also been community members here that have gathered and placed barricades at different areas throughout this area so that vehicles could not come in and potentially be used as a ramming weapon. So there has been this very deep, tight-knit community feeling to what is unfolding here at the scene of the shooting yesterday. Meanwhile, there also is still underlying that sense of anger and frustration. There's a street sign on a street post here not far away that shows an image of the ICE agent that pulled the trigger that killed Renee Good. And on top of it, it says, "We know his victims. What's his name?" That really gets to this idea of this community wanting not only transparency, but justice. Now, initially, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension said that they would be investigating this shooting. We have just learned that they are saying they've had to withdraw that investigation after the FBI took over, because the FBI said it would not provide case materials for this. So we are starting to get reactions from that. Meanwhile, Arthi, the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, is expected to speak at a press conference later today. We'll, of course, be monitoring to find out what comes from that.
Thank you for this, Brian. That is CNN's Brian Abel in Minneapolis. The city of Minneapolis remains on edge following yesterday's fatal shooting of a 37-year-old woman by an ICE agent. It's still unclear exactly what happened because of widely conflicting versions of events. Trump, the U.S. president, officials for the Trump administration say the agent fired in self-defense. But the city's mayor says video directly contradicts that narrative. This is the scene unfolding today in Minneapolis. It shows a standoff between an angry crowd and federal agents. The state's governor is calling for calm as tensions continue to mount. And many in Minnesota are taking to the streets in protest. That includes my next guest, Lisa Erbs. She is the co-leader of Indivisible Twin Cities, a grassroots organization. She joins us now from St. Paul, Minnesota. Lisa, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you were at the Whipple Building protest in Minneapolis earlier today. We had some images of that we just shared with our viewers. Can you walk us through what you saw and what that scene was like?
Yeah, it was, it's an interesting spot because it doesn't really have a good place where people can gather and protest. But so we were basically divided into three groups in three different areas, with the purpose being to block the parking lot where the ICE agents come and go, to keep them from leaving the facility. So I was in one of the, in the middle of these three different areas. So where I was, there were no altercations with ICE agents. It was pretty calm and steady. But I was able to view at one of the other areas where apparently something was going on because there was tear gas was deployed, and I could see the tear gas from where I was and smell it.
We know certainly there have been reports of how tensions had been high even prior to this incident because of the ICE operations being conducted within the state. Had there been any plans to take action like this, a demonstration like this, prior to the killing of the 37-year-old woman?
No, but we've been preparing for something like this to happen. Unfortunately, because of the way that ICE has been conducting themselves and being really aggressive, we were unfortunately we were worried that something exactly like this would happen. And so we've been preparing for rapid responses to their activity. And so this morning was one of those events.
How are people feeling on the ground in light of what has transpired in the past 24 hours or so? How are people in the community feeling?
Well, they're angry, for sure. Very angry, frustrated, and very sad. This woman did not need to die, and people are very upset about it.
And in terms of the response that you've seen, too, with the number of demonstrators who came out today, certainly many of them like-minded individuals trying to, as you described, stay at different points of exit for ICE officials to try and stop more of these operations from coming through. How are all of those individuals looking ahead to the next steps as well? Because ICE says it will still be there. It has no intentions of leaving.
Right. And I would say that the people of the Minneapolis, St. Paul area are not going anywhere either. There is a very much determined, they're very determined to continue doing what we've been doing, which includes the protests like we had today. There are several more already planned throughout over the weekend. I'm not necessarily involved in organizing them, but I'm aware of them. And also just the activities that the constitutional observers have been conducting since ICE started these raids in Minnesota. So all that activity will continue. No one has any plans to stop. We won't stop until they leave.
Lisa, I want to thank you for taking time to speak with me today.
Thank you.
That is Lisa Erbs. She is the co-leader of the Indivisible Twin Cities, a grassroots organization, and we reached her in St. Paul, Minnesota. And now, as we heard, of course, the state's governor has been calling for calm, and he's actually speaking this hour on the situation that unfolded involving an ICE agent and that 37-year-old woman, Renee Nicole Good. Let's listen in.
Will be there to defend her honor and see this as a human being, not a moment in time or the callous casualness that I've watched some people on TV gloss over what they saw. We've also spent a lot of time talking last 24 hours about accountability. That means no function of government operates with impunity. It means when someone's in a position of authority and they commit any act that impacts our people, there has to be another place to turn to get justice. Checks and balances. Basic idea, the center of the formation of our country. It's the only measure that protects us from the abuse of government or federal overreach or tyrannical government. Yesterday, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, the BCA, spent the day yesterday attempting to get that accountability. We have learned that the Trump administration has now denied the state that ability to participate in the investigation. And I just want to make this as clear as possible to everyone. Minnesota must be part of this investigation. These are nonpartisan career professionals that have spent years building the trust of the community. There's a BCA Force Investigations Unit that was created by the legislature, by the people of Minnesota, to provide an independent, consistent, and trusted mechanism for investigating the use of force incidents involving law enforcement officers. Minnesota has seen our share of these. And what you've seen is, and I have witnessed it during my time, that these professionals have risen to the moment. They are trusted by people. People who are not by inclination trusting of law enforcement or government have come to see the professionals at the BCA as true arbitrators that can get them justice. The unit is the result of years of scrutiny, public engagement, and bipartisan legislative action. Minnesotans have made it clear time and again they expect transparency through this process where a police officer uses deadly force. The BCA, Commissioner, Superintendent Evans, have earned that trust by delivering on that expectation. I think it's clear to everyone as they saw this that it feels now that Minnesota has been taken out of the investigation. It feels very, very difficult that we will get a fair outcome. And I say that only because people in positions of power have already passed judgment, from the president to the vice president to Kristi Noem, have stood and told you things that are verifiably false, verifiably inaccurate. They have determined the character of a 37-year-old mom that they didn't even don't know. They've determined that the actions are done. I don't know. I've not used inflammatory terms of what happened. I've asked us to find the answers. The only way we find the answers is a thorough investigation by nonpartisan professionals. We've delivered that. We've been able to do it. We've earned the trust. And when I say that, the trust of BCA, and I tell Minnesotans the trust of law enforcement here. Everyone knows, globally, certainly here, that George Floyd, who was murdered a few blocks from this site, tore at the soul of who we were. But we healed. We built back trust. Chief Brian O'Hara came in and took one of the most difficult jobs in America of building back trust in the police force in Minneapolis after Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd. And he's earned that. And he's level. And he's fair. And he's asking for that. And so, Minnesotans, I will continue to press that we be part of the investigation, that we do the investigation, so that Minnesotans can trust what the outcome is. I don't have a predetermined notion. Yes, I saw the video. Yes, I saw that. But a thorough investigation will see what happened before that. It will take all factors in, and it will come up with a fair and just conclusion. And we will accept that. Very, very difficult for Minnesotans to think in any way this is going to be fair when Kristi Noem was judge, jury, and basically executioner yesterday. That's very, very difficult to think that they were going to be fair. With that being said, Minnesotans, we've risen to the occasion so far, but it's going to get challenging. It's going to be challenging because I feel your anger. The human desire to lash out in this moment is very real. I can tell you that that is the wish of many people, that they fulfill the wish they want to see us turn on one another, turn towards violence rather than peaceful reconciliation, rather than peaceful civil disobedience. And we have to do our best to not play into that. I say this too when I saw yesterday some of the anger, whether it's Minneapolis Police, Minnesota State Patrol, Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, Minnesota National Guard. They are there to protect and serve, as it said. They are there to protect Minnesotans. Throwing your anger at them only inflames this situation. And I know some of you were up at the Whipple building this morning, and to the press who are here, I saw some of this myself. Thank you. Continue to have access to every single space. Continue to cover this story. Continue to show the world what's out there. I will say it where our president won't. The press are the defenders of our democracy. You need to be there. But I also tell folks, protect our Minnesotans who are out there and don't turn the anger to them. This is a brazen use of force. They want us to bend the knee. They want us to capitulate. The way we give them what they want is allow them to use this as an excuse to put more troops on the ground. Use them as an excuse to show that these are violent protests. And I also witnessed what I think is going to be a pattern over the next few days and the coming hours, is I saw an individual show up there with the intent to antagonize folks who were peacefully protesting, with a bullhorn to scream at them. And again, the desire to move on that individual is exactly what they want, because our respect for the First Amendment means we will expect and respect all opinions. If this individual is there expressing support for ICE, that's their constitutional right to do so, and they need to be protected. Don't allow that to be a catalyst to create violence. We believe in states' rights. We believe the federal government needs to stay out of this. We believe that the situation has gotten worse and less safe because of their presence. And I will just say there were two incidents yesterday I saw after this that just tore at my soul. I saw an individual at the scene identify themselves as medical personnel, a physician, and asked to provide aid, and an ICE agent said, "I do not care." That lack of humanity was chilling to me. And after this incident happened, and after the tensions rose, ICE agents entered a Minnesota school, causing disruptions at that school. I can't say this strongly enough as governor, as a parent, as a teacher. To our elected representatives, Democrats and Republicans, I beg you, I implore you to tell them to stay out of our schools. This tragedy will be magnified 100-fold if this fight moves into the hallways of our public schools amongst our youth. And they're watching us. They're watching us now, how we respond. So I've got a few simple asks. Let us, the professionals, handle this on Minnesota soil, this investigation. De-escalate this situation by removing yourselves from this situation with these 2,000 agents that were put here. And above all else, stay out of our schools. I'd like to ask you to care, but that might be a step too far for some people. But I know Minnesotans care. So we'll protest peacefully. We will win in courts. We will certainly win in the defense of our democracy, because the American people see what's happening here. But the way that we don't win and the way that we lose, if this turns towards violence and allows them to escalate. It cannot happen. So I ask the grass top leaders out there, the faith leaders, the folks who are on the streets, and in many times the true leaders are not the elected officials. They're the folks on the ground. I beg you, implore you, follow those words of the leaders we've had. I had the privilege of serving with John Lewis. And John talked about good trouble. I'm not telling you not to find good trouble, but I asked John many times, I said, "John, I don't know if I'd have your self-restraint. Didn't you want to lash out?" He said, "Yes, daily." But he said, "I wanted to win this. I wanted to do what right, and I wanted justice to prevail. And to do that, I knew the only way was to not lash out, to not give in to that." So to each and every one of you, We're not going to win this through violence. We're going to win it through justice. We're going to win it through compassion. We're going to win it through Minnesota Nice, and we're going to win it by holding every one of these people accountable as they should for what we've seen on the streets of Minneapolis. With that, I'm going to turn to Commissioner Jacobson to give you a situation update.
Thank you, Governor. Again, I'm Bob Jacobson, and it is my honor to serve as the Commissioner of Public Safety. First of all, again, I want to express my sincere condolences to the loved ones of Renee Nicole Good. Someone has lost their life, and that is not something that anyone takes lightly. Minnesotans came out yesterday to express their grief, their frustration, and their anger at this terrible tragedy. I expect that they will continue to come out today. And I want to thank everyone who demonstrated peacefully. This helped honor Renee's memory and gave her family space to mourn. Minnesota's residents and visitors have the right to demonstrate and to exercise their First Amendment rights. I want to remind everyone that there are safe ways to do so. Our goal is to reduce tensions, to avoid conflict, and to maintain a calm environment. As I mentioned yesterday, we recommend the following safe and lawful ways to demonstrate. Please get together peacefully with others in public areas where pedestrians are allowed. March or walk together in pedestrian areas, please, not on the roadways. Make your voice heard through chants, speeches, and displaying signs. And there are a few things I just want to mention very quickly that are unsafe. Because as always, our top priority is public safety, and we cannot allow behaviors that create hazards, threaten public safety, or disrupt emergency services or endanger people nearby. That would include certainly demonstrating on the freeway, walking on highways, throwing objects, setting things on fire, property damage, graffiti, fireworks, illegal weapons, reckless and dangerous driving, or assaultive or aggressive behavior. I know that we all want more definitive answers about that fatal shooting that occurred yesterday. And as we are able to get those answers and dispel rumors and false information, then we can rightfully honor Renee's memory and help her family, loved ones, and our community heal. With that, I'll turn it back to Governor Walz and maybe a few questions.
Please. Esme? I have not. As I said yesterday, I did speak to Secretary Noem and received a lot of talking points. I will note that I asked Secretary Noem how she would have felt if President Biden had sent 2,000 troops into Rapid City, South Dakota, and she said she would have welcomed them. I leave that for the folks of South Dakota to determine. I've not spoken to the president. I would ask him, first of all, the goal here is to make America safe, is what he said. There is no verifiable evidence that any of this is making America safer. I would ask him to de-escalate in the moment, to allow Minnesotans to back up and grieve, to allow this investigation to be played out by the rule of law. I said it again, I have not passed any judgment on this. And to please, whatever it is, leave Minnesota alone. Earlier this week, I don't know if it was if something he wanted or I've already made it clear. I'm exiting the stage here in a year. But I told him I have a year to continue to do what I love dearly and what I believe I've been good at, making Minnesota a better place to live. The number of calls we got today of parents asking if they should send their kids to school or not. Minneapolis had to make what I believe was the absolute correct decision to cancel school. We have students out of learning today. I would just ask him, I'm not talking anything about border security. I'm not talking anything about what he needs to do on that. None of this is accomplishing either his mission or making us any safer. So just give us a pause. Let us breathe. Look, we're exhausted. We're exhausted as Minnesotans. We're exhausted as Americans. And this relentless assault on Minnesota, for whatever reason, is just cruel now. It has reached cruelness. So please, just give us a break. And if it's me, you're already getting what you want. but leave my people alone. Leave our state alone, and look again and see what's happening. It's not me saying it. You're hearing it from many, many others. So that's what I would say.
Is there anything stopping state and local law enforcement from conducting an independent investigation into this, even if the federal government does not want to have you have a joint investigation?
So, great question. We have asked for cooperation from the federal government. We were invited in to do a joint investigation on this initially. We continue to work with the federal government all the time on joint investigations. This is not something new, whether it be with the FBI or other federal law enforcement agencies, so we are accustomed to doing joint investigations. As the governor has mentioned, our force investigative unit within the BCA has a stellar reputation for doing quality investigations, for finding the answers to the questions that people have. There are so many questions out there that I know the public has from watching what's been shown on social media and regular media. And the goal for me would be to provide an investigation, preferably in tandem with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, because we work with them all the time, and they are they do have all the evidence in the original investigative notes and reports. We have none of that. They have shared none of that with us. We would welcome the opportunity to jump back in, to do that investigation, use our high-quality investigators from the BCA to be able to do that with them, to find the answers that the public deserves. Without any of that information, or without any of that assistance from the FBI or the federal government, we would be at a loss to be able to initiate and conduct a thorough investigation. For us to be able to do that, it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, without cooperation from the federal government.
How difficult would it be to file state charges without the cooperation of the FBI?
To be able to file state charges, we would need, again, a full investigation, which would include the opportunity to have been at the crime scene, to have had the opportunity to take a look at all the video and evidence that the FBI would have in their possession. I don't make any prejudgments about what happened yesterday. We can all see what we want to see on the videos and what we have seen in the media. That doesn't mean that none of us, I will not, as a public safety professional, jump to any conclusions as to who is at fault in this. What I will say, though, is that unless we do that thorough investigation, unless we have access to all of that evidence, unless we have access to the agents that were involved in that, to any witnesses, without any of that, we would not be able to put together a quality investigation for any prosecutor to be able to make a determination as to whether or not someone should be charged with a crime.
I'm going to note on this too that no one less than Tom Holman yesterday said it would be unprofessional to pass judgment ahead of time. Now, the disconnect between what Tom Holman said and Kristi Noem said needs to be rectified by the federal government. I will note too, this is a question I asked, not being an attorney of my team, and it will go to the family, that there will certainly be civil cases filed on this, and those will be filed in Minnesota court and be held in court. Corn?
What is standard operating procedure when a federal agent of any kind in Minnesota shot and killed somebody, a civilian? Are you usually involved? Is there usually a joint investigation?
Generally, if there is any investigation involving use by a federal officer, generally the federal government, federal officials will lead that investigation. We have participated in numerous investigations in the past. It is very infrequent where there's a use of force by a law enforcement officer, federal law enforcement officer, but we have worked jointly and shared information in previous investigations.
I'd like to say, I'm gonna add on this. I'm gonna say, if you truly wanted to de-escalate this situation, the logical conclusion would be to follow that procedure and allow Minnesota to participate. And that's where we started yesterday, and it's one of the reasons I came out here, and I'm not going to criticize that because that was the proper process, and I'm going to have to talk to Minnesotans to try, and it's a very difficult task. I think we all know what can happen here, to calmly wait until all the facts come out. I think you in this room are seeing the gravity of this situation, by not allowing Minnesota to participate, and the prejudgment that's already been made by leadership creates a very, very dangerous situation. And that's why, once again, I'm going to reiterate to our federal partners, simply let us be part of this. Use our professional folks. They will gain you the credibility and the trust of Minnesotans to believe the work that you're doing is honest, and it's not just a whitewash to backfill a predeceived notion. All right, so I got 10.
That the state can do to put in additional protection around schools or to allow for additional e-learning days for these situations?
Yeah, it's interesting, Dana, that you would ask that. We were just, as we were coming in here discussing, someone asked about that, and they mentioned Ruby Bridges and the Little Rock folks about escorting people in. We have not determined that yet, but it is a situation that we're going to have to explore. As I said, again, the thing that cut me deeply was watching what happened in our schools and the chaos. And I was on with Commissioner Jett this morning as he's talking to folks from St. Cloud to Duluth about what they think about today. Should we be in classes today and tomorrow in those schools, or does it pose a potential risk? And so we're trying to figure that out. I think many of the things and the lessons we learned during COVID is local communities and local schools being able to make some of these decisions in the long run probably gets us better outcomes, but we are deeply concerned with that. I'm going to come back as soon as we get any more information from all of you. We'll be in front of you again. I will reiterate, and many of you know my wife Gwen, the First Lady, is an English and literature teacher, and we were talking about some of this, and she got asked the question, and it was when will all of this end? And what Gwen said, it will end when enough people say it will end, and I think that is sage advice. And then I couldn't help but thinking, and it scares me a little bit. I heard those words. We remembered, many of us in here in sophomore, when we read it, that the party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most important directive. It certainly feels like that in this moment. And so I want Minnesotans to not believe that I'm telling you not to be angry, not to be scared, not to be feeling a little bit hopeless in this moment. But I would also say this, and I saw it last night, I saw it during George Floyd, I've seen it throughout our history. When things looked really bleak, it was Minnesota's first that held that line for the nation. On that July 3rd, 1863. And I think now we may be in that moment that the nation's looking to us to hold the line on democracy, to hold the line on decency, to hold the line on accountability, and more than that, to rise up as neighbors and simply say, we can look out for one another. We can have differences, but we've proved to the world going on 250 years that our democracy could hold. It feels to me like we're at one of those inflection points, that simply asking our government to give us accountability, listen to local leaders, ratchet down the rhetoric, let people feel safe in their person, and let's let our kids go to school without fear. Let's let our kids go to school knowing that tomorrow could be a little better day. And so we're going to work on that. I'll leave you with this, and I'm not sure when we'll get in front of you next, but to Minnesotans, again, just one last time, don't give them what they want. Don't give them the unrest that they want. Don't give in to allowing them to bring more folks in here. Don't allow them to expand this somewhere else. Rise up, wrap your arms around your neighbors, peacefully express your First Amendment and your constitutional rights, and let's start healing, get some answers, and move Minnesota forward. Thank you.
And we have been listening to Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and the Commissioner for Public Safety, Bob Jacobson. They are speaking following demonstrations that continue to take place in the aftermath of the fatal shooting of a 37-year-old woman by an immigration enforcement officer in Minneapolis. The governor began talking about a recent development just in the last hour or so, where a statement was issued by the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, known as the BCA. In the statement, the BCA says the FBI is shutting out the local investigative unit out of this investigation into this ICE-involved fatal incident. Governor Walz says this action makes it feel like we won't get a fair outcome from that investigation, saying federal officials have made assumptions. In some cases, what he says are false statements about what unfolded. He says the community feels less safe because of ICE agents carrying out operations in the state. Now there's reporting from U.S. media, primarily the New York Times, saying the Trump administration is going to redirect more than 100 Customs and Border Protection agents and officers to the state of Minnesota. The CBC's Willie Lowry joins us live from Washington. So tell us more about what we've heard from Governor Walz, Willie.
Andrew, he essentially made an appeal to Minnesotans, saying that he understood their frustration, their sadness, their fear at what has transpired in his state over the last 24 hours, but appealed to them to try and resist the urge of letting their anger give a cause or give authorities, federal authorities, that is, an excuse to crack down even harder on the state and on the city of Minneapolis. Of course, there have been protests all morning there. We've seen video of some fairly tense scenes with federal authorities dressed in green and in riot gear, pushing, shoving, violently detaining protesters. There's a lot of visible anger, both from the people of Minnesota, but also from its leaders. Walz was clearly angry, clearly frustrated with what he is hearing and seeing from federal authorities, especially from President Donald Trump and his Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem.
Yeah, and Willie, we continue to hear two very different versions of events from federal officials. What are they?
Sign here not far away that says, "We know his victims," and it has a picture of that ICE agent. And then below it says, "What's his name?" Now, initially we were told that the state of Minnesota, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, was going to be investigating this alongside the FBI. Now they say that the FBI has changed course and will not provide case materials to state officials that would be investigating. So they have had to reluctantly withdraw that investigation. All this happening as public officials, both local, state, as well as elected federal officials representing the state of Minnesota, are upping the pressure for that transparency. We will have to see what comes of it later today. But right now, what we are seeing here in Minnesota is a group of people, this community that is both frustrated and somber as another life was taken in this community at the hands of law enforcement. In Minneapolis, Brian Abel reporting.
And let's bring in the CBC's Hillary Johnstone now. So, Hillary, as we look at the images of ongoing protests and a growing memorial to the 37-year-old Renee Good, what more are we learning about her?
That's right. So we're learning that she is this 37-year-old mother of three. A lot of these new details are coming from family members who have been speaking with local media in Minnesota, including her mother, who spoke with the Minnesota Star-Tribune and spoke about the fact that she is a mother of three, that she has two older children from a previous marriage, but she also has a 6-year-old son who she shared with a military veteran who died in 2023, meaning that 6-year-old then, after the events of yesterday, does not have any living parents. We also know that she lived in Minneapolis, not that far from where everything took place yesterday. She lived there with her partner. She had spent most of her life in Colorado, had then also briefly lived in Missouri with family members, but had been living in this area in Minneapolis. We also know that she described herself as a poet, as a writer, as a wife, and as a mother. That was on her own social media feeds. And the university, which she attended back in 2020, has released a statement. This is the Old Dominion University. Its president has put out a statement saying, quote, "Indeed, this tragedy reflects the deep strain being felt in countless communities across our nation. As citizens, it is our duty and right to call upon leaders and officials to restore civility in all facets of our lives, especially at the hands of those who are entrusted to protect and to serve." So that is a little bit of what we've heard from some people. And of course, we've been seeing scenes like these vigils that have been starting. Of course, this is very near where everything took place yesterday. But we have also been seeing protests at different sites around the country. And then earlier today, a protest between people who had gathered and members of law enforcement at the Whipple Federal Building. And this is sort of these federal immigration officials. They had been using this as a bit of a staging ground. And we also heard from one community activist who had attended those protests outside the Whipple building earlier today, spoke with us here on CBC News Network, and said that this was their concern. When it was first announced that there would be federal immigration officials going to Minneapolis, they were concerned that something like this might happen.
This woman did not need to die, and people are very upset about it. Unfortunately, because of the way that ICE has been conducting themselves and being really aggressive, we were unfortunately we were worried that something exactly like this would happen, and so we've been preparing for rapid responses to their activity.
So those are just some of the concerns that we have heard from officials. It's certainly important to point out here that she was a U.S. citizen, Renee Good. And what you're looking at right now, these are live images from the scene showing people once again gathering. So certainly something similar to what we've seen earlier today, and it would seem that some of these vigils are building, Andrew.
Yeah, and Hillary, the governor of Minnesota, just spoke about the incident. He began by talking about the 37-year-old woman. What did he say about her? That's
right. He spoke about her before he started to talk about sort of the broader implications and some of their broader concerns of what is going to happen with the investigation. Started by speaking about 37-year-old Renee Good and sort of asked people to remember that at the end of the day that she was a human being, and rather than just a point in time or a historical event. So this is a little bit more of what we heard from Governor Tim Walz.
Minnesotans will tell her life story. Minnesotans will be there to defend her honor and see this as a human being, not a moment in time or the callous casualness that I've watched some people on TV gloss over what they saw.
Now, just a little while ago, we also heard from the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, who you will remember yesterday referred to 37-year-old Renee Good as a domestic terrorist. She reiterated that once again today, doubled down on that. But then when she was asked by a reporter in the room, essentially, do you have a message for the American people who are seeing the fact that a 37-year-old American citizen, mother of three, has died? What would your message be? And she said that she is asking people to pray for that 37-year-old woman's family and called her death tragic.
Hillary, thank you. The CBC's Hillary Johnstone. We're following breaking news out of Washington, where the U.S. Senate has approved a major bipartisan resolution. It keeps President Donald Trump from taking any further military action against Venezuela. The capture of that country's leader, Nicolas Maduro, was a special operations mission where even top congressional leaders were kept in the dark until well after it was over. Today's resolution passed by a vote of 52 to 47. 5 Republicans joined all Democrats in supporting it.
Today, the Senate really took a critical step to reasserting its constitutional authority and towards stopping President Trump as he's lurching towards another endless, expensive war. All the while, American families here are struggling with skyrocketing costs. Next week, this fight will continue in the Senate. The more the American people hear about what's going on in Venezuela, and the more they learn about it, the less they're going to like it, the more fiercely they will oppose it. This vote moves the resolution one step closer to final passage because Democrats forced Republicans to confront reality. The president is openly signaling a long-term military and financial commitment abroad with no authorization, with no plan.
President Donald Trump has responded to the resolution in an online post saying Republicans should be ashamed of the senators that just voted with Democrats in attempting to take away our powers to fight and defend the United States of America. This vote greatly hampers American self-defense and national security, impeding the president's authority as commander-in-chief. In any event, and despite their stupidity, the War Powers Act is unconstitutional, totally violating Article 2 of the Constitution, as all presidents and their departments of justice have determined before me. Nevertheless, a more important Senate vote will be taking place next week on this very subject. Trump is scheduled to meet tomorrow with the heads of major American oil companies. They'll be discussing ways of boosting oil production in Venezuela after U.S. forces deposed President Nicolas Maduro. Trump says in a new interview with the New York Times, the U.S. could oversee the Venezuelan oil industry for years. Meanwhile, this week, Canadian oil producers have seen prices take a tumble. But Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canadian crude will remain competitive as he seeks to expand exports to Asia. Trump's repeated threats to take over Greenland are also causing concern here in Canada. 2 residents of Iqaluit who grew up in Greenland spoke to CBC News about the president's push for control, including through the use of military force.
It's a very real threat. We've seen how massively successful Trump has been to go into Venezuela and pluck the president, the dictatorial president, out of his house and put him in jail in the States. And the island of Greenland is a mass island, but only 56,000 people, with a very small military presence. So the ability for him to annex the entire island is not far-fetched.
Greenlanders say they're not for sale, and they're 85% saying we don't want to be part of the United States. We are not agreeing to this. And the Greenlandic leaders, the politicians, are saying we are willing to talk with respectfully, and we should be respected, and we should be recognized as a sovereign country, and we have our own autonomy to come to agreements, to speak diplomatically with the United States.
The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says he plans to meet with members of Denmark's government next week to discuss the Trump administration's aspirations for Greenland. With the United States taking military action against Venezuela and also threatening to take over Greenland, questions are once again swirling whether Canada could be on Donald Trump's list for a takeover. The CBC's Mike Crawley is following the story from Washington. And Mike, some Canadians are raising the alarm that it could happen. And this conversation has really evolved, I would say, over the last year, from what was a joke about the 51st state to some concern in this country that there could be some use of force. Tell us about it.
Well, yeah, Andrew, this was indeed the kind of theory that would have been pretty much laughed off a year ago. And, you know, even when Donald Trump was asked around a year ago if he would use military force to make Canada the 51st state, he said no. He said economic force. But then all this recent action, particularly these threats against Greenland, you know, since it's a territory of Denmark, which is a NATO member, it's pushing some pretty serious people to start asking this question of whether would the U.S., you know, use military force against other NATO members, namely Canada. So now you've got a seasoned Canadian diplomat, Bob Rae. He just recently retired after 5 years as Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, saying Canada is, quote, on the menu for the Trump administration to potentially exert some military force if it doesn't get its way otherwise. And yesterday here with you on CBC News Network, you had Adam Gordon saying similar things. He's a former senior advisor to Canada's current foreign affairs minister and her predecessor. And he was pointing to what he calls a pattern of statements and behavior from Trump and his administration. So all that 51st state rhetoric, the threats to take over Greenland, the new national security strategy, it explicitly says in writing that the U.S. is going to reassert and enforce American preeminence in the Western Hemisphere. So you add all that up, and Adam Gordon says you've got to consider that the use of military force is at least a possibility. and that Canada needs to prepare for that possibility. Andrew?
And we've also heard Donald Trump refer to the border as artificial lines. Mike, while there could be threats to Canada's sovereignty, what would be the counterpoint to that argument?
Yeah, so the counter arguments are that, well, Canada does indeed face real threats from the U.S., but they don't realistically include the threat of military force. So I spoke with some senior observers of U.S.-Canada relations, and you know, they're concerned that if you get too caught up in worrying about the potential for U.S. military action, that distracts from the real threats to Canada's economy and sovereignty. So if you take the Greenland situation, for instance, clearly there you can see the potential for parallels. You got the Trump administration saying it needs to control Greenland for national security because of concerns over Russian and Chinese movements in the Arctic. So sure, that raises the specter of the U.S. wanting greater influence in Canada's Arctic for similar reasons. But the idea that the U.S. would resort to military force against Canada to get that, well, for these observers, just doesn't seem to be an at all likely scenario, even for the Trump administration. Here's one of the people I spoke with.
A more constructive approach would be based around working with our allies. So that includes working with Canada, working with Greenland, working with Denmark to build kind of an allied approach to national security and Arctic security and defense, one that's not based on threats.
And Andrew, I just want to leave you with one other voice that we've heard from on this topic, and that's Jerry Butts. He was a longtime senior figure in Justin Trudeau's Prime Minister's office, has also advised Prime Minister Mark Carney. And Butts told the CBC podcast Front Burner that he figures, sure, the Trump administration is going to do everything it can to gain leverage over Canada in trade talks this year, including trying to influence Canadian politics, but he does not see military action being on the table.
Mike, thank you. The CBC's Mike Crawley live in Washington. Still ahead. As Canada looks to negotiate a new trade deal with the United States, data has surfaced that reveals Canadian exports south of the border are plunging to record lows. We'll get the details just ahead here on CBC News Network. Anger and frustration are boiling over in Minneapolis. People there are outraged over the death of 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good. She died after being shot by an immigration enforcement officer. There are calls for the agent involved to be arrested, while President Donald Trump has blamed Good for the deadly encounter. State and local officials say the video shows otherwise. An FBI investigation is now underway. Local officials want ICE to leave the state. They're urging protesters to stay peaceful. New data shows that the share of Canadian exports heading to the United States are at some of the lowest levels in decades. We have the CBC's Anis Hadari to explain what this means. And Anis, what's happening with U.S.-Canada trade in these numbers?
exports from Canada to the United States make up the lowest percentage of our total exports since 1997. Now, these numbers are from October, and they're a little delayed because of the U.S. government shutdown. And I should mention, when we say it's the lowest since 1997, that excludes those huge drops from the times there were COVID restrictions. But other than the height of the pandemic, this past October saw us send the lowest portion of our total output, our total exports to the United States since 97. And that year was also when it started getting measured in this way, period. So we don't really even have earlier data to compare this to. It really shows a continued drop in how much Canada is sending to the United States. Now, we can't say for sure, of course, because these are just raw numbers, but it is likely that tariffs have a big thing to do with that, as goods from outside of the United States become more expensive in the United States due to those tariffs. Well, less of it gets sold there. Now, going in the other direction, imports from the United States to Canada, they increased by more than 5%. So Canadians imported a little bit more from the United States in October. And the total imports to Canada from the whole world, from everywhere, those were up by more than 3%. So in October, Canadians brought in a lot more computers and computer parts in record numbers in some cases. But if we go back to the exports to non-U.S. nations, so the rest of the world, they jumped by 15.6% and hit a record high, Andrew.
They hit a record high, and as you say, around 67%. I mean, that's close to 10% lower than it was, say, a year ago. Gold seems to be a driver. What's happening there?
So the total exports leaving Canada, period, snuck up by more than 2%, and that was partially because of demand for gold. And exporting gold to the United Kingdom was also a factor in that jump in exports. Something to keep in mind with gold, though, is that, its popularity globally is increasing as investors turn to it a little bit more versus, perhaps markets or currencies that are seen as less stable than they used to be. But that popularity is increasing the price of gold as well. That price has been hitting records at times. So the higher price of gold is also shoving up the value of gold exports. This may not necessarily mean that Canada is suddenly churning out, way more gold. At least part of it is that gold is more expensive, so it makes a bigger chunk of our exports when it comes to the monetary value. Andrew.
Anis, thank you. The CBC's Anis Adari live in Calgary. We are taking you live now to Washington, where U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt are speaking to reporters. Let's listen.
3,600% increase in vehicle rammings and an 8,000% increase in death threats. ICE agents are faithfully enforcing federal law to protect the safety of the American people by removing criminal illegal aliens from our country, which is exactly what nearly 80 million Americans elected President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance to do. Radicals in the Democrat Party are furious over this. They don't want our border secured or criminal illegal aliens being removed. As a result, Democrats are impeding immigration enforcement operations daily, creating extremely heightened and dangerous circumstances that make it nearly impossible for the men and women of law enforcement to simply do their jobs. Democrats are calling to defund federal law enforcement agencies who are protecting public safety. And Democrats are calling to abolish ICE and defund the police. That will never be allowed to happen under this president and vice president. The Trump administration will redouble our efforts to get the worst of the worst, criminal illegal alien killers, rapists, and pedophiles off of American streets. The Department of Homeland Security will continue to operate on the ground in Minnesota, not only to remove criminal illegal aliens, but also to continue conducting door-to-door investigations of the rampant fraud that has taken place in the state under the failed and corrupt leadership of Democrat Governor Tim Walz. Taxpayers have been ripped off to the tune of billions of dollars in this one state alone, and that is going to end, and people are going to be held accountable. The Trump administration has activated thousands of federal agents, doubled the number of U.S. attorneys in the DOJ office in Minneapolis, and surged resources to hold fraudsters accountable and demand justice for law-abiding American taxpayers and citizens across our country. And that's what brings the Vice President out here with me today to discuss all the Trump administration is doing and to make an additional important announcement on this front. So please, Mr. Vice President, will be joining us now.
Carolyn.
Thank you.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And I want to echo some of what Carolyn said about what we're doing to combat the rampant fraud that exists in our immigration system, thanks to failed politicians and thanks to people who allowed the American taxpayer to be taken advantage of for far too long. I think it's important to understand why this matters to the American people. I am a father of 3 young kids, a lot of people in my generation. What is that going on there? Is that normal? Okay. CNN installed this broken camera just to throw me off my game, but it's not going to work. So here's the simple fact here. If you're a young parent struggling to afford childcare in the United States of America, there are programs that we have to make it easier for your kids to get in daycare, for your kids to get in preschool. Those programs should go to American citizens, not be defrauded by Somali immigrants and others. Make it hard for you to get the access to the resources you need. But number 2, making it easier for people who shouldn't even be in this country to fleece the United States and our taxpayers to begin with. We have actually activated a major interagency task force to make it possible to get to the heart of this fraud. We have Department of Agriculture resources that are focused on SNAP fraud so that people who need food benefits can get them, but illegal aliens and other fraudsters don't. We have over 1,500 subpoenas that the Department of Justice has issued to get to the heart of the fraud ring. We've done almost 100 indictments, mostly Somali immigrants, but also a few others. And of course, we're looking in with broad investigatory authority to a number of the instances of wrongdoing that we've seen in Minneapolis. But we also want to expand this. We know that the fraud isn't just happening in Minneapolis, it's also happening in states like Ohio. It's happening in states like California. And so what we're doing in order to help coordinate this remarkable interagency effort from the Trump administration, but also to make sure that we prosecute the bad guys and do it as swiftly and efficiently as possible, is we are creating a new Assistant Attorney General position who will have nationwide jurisdiction over the issue of fraud. Now, of course, that person's efforts will start and focus primarily in Minnesota, but it is going to be a nationwide effort because, unfortunately, the American people have been defrauded in a very nationwide way. I want to thank a couple of people for their cooperation, in particular Pam Bondi, our Attorney General. First of all, for getting a lot of resources to Minneapolis to start to investigate and prosecute this fraud, really at an industrial scale. We've never seen fraud like this in the history of our country. Pam has been doing a great job to get the resources there to uncover it, but importantly, creating a job like this often takes months, sometimes even longer. When we realized that we needed this Associate Attorney General position, Pam got this person up and running in about a week. We're going to make the nomination hopefully in the next few days. We'll obviously let you guys know who that is when we do it. I've talked to Senate Majority Leader John Thune, who has promised me swift confirmation for this official, but this is the person who is going to make sure that we stop defrauding the American people. Here's one final thing I'll say about this. I've heard a lot of people say that we need a special counsel to investigate fraud in the United States of America. I actually agree, and that's what this position does. It has all the benefits, all the resources, all the authority of a special counsel, but with 2 crucial differences. Number 1, it will be run out of the White House under the supervision of me and the President of the United States. And number 2, it's actually constitutionally legitimate. As you guys may know, the special counsel statute has some major constitutional questions. When we get the bad guys, we want to make sure we get them permanently and they don't have some legal technicality they can get out of, which is why we set it up as an Associate Attorney General. I'll take some questions, but I want to make just one final observation here. When I was actually walking out here, somebody sent me a photo of a CNN headline about what happened in Minneapolis. And this is the headline. I'm just going to read it. Outrage after ICE officer kills U.S. citizen in Minneapolis. Well, that's one way to put it, and that is the way that many people in the corporate media have put this attack over the last 24 hours. And I say attack very, very intentionally, because this was an attack on federal law enforcement, this was an attack on law and order, this was an attack on the American people. The way that the media, by and large, has reported this story has been an absolute disgrace, and it puts our law enforcement officers at risk every single day. What that headline leaves out is the fact that that very ICE officer nearly had his life ended, dragged by a car 6 months ago, 33 stitches in his leg. So you think maybe he's a little bit sensitive about somebody ramming him with an automobile? What that headline leaves out is that that woman was there to interfere with a legitimate law enforcement operation in the United States of America. What that headline leaves out is that that woman is part of a broader left-wing network to attack, to dox, to assault, and to make it impossible for our ICE officers to do their job. If the media wants to tell the truth, they ought to tell the truth that a group of left-wing radicals have been working tirelessly, sometimes using domestic terror techniques to try to make it impossible for the President of the United States to do what the American people elected him to do, which is enforce our immigration laws. The President stands with ICE, I stand with ICE, we stand with all of our law enforcement officers. And part of that is recognizing that you people in the media, not everybody in this room, but many people in this room have been lying about this attack. She was trying to ram this guy with her car. He shot back. He defended himself. He's already been seriously wounded in law enforcement operations before, and everybody who's been repeating the lie that this is some innocent woman who was out for a drive in Minneapolis when a law enforcement officer shot at her, you should be ashamed of yourselves. Every single one of you. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I wanted to read a quote from Tim Walz earlier today. He said, "When things looked bleak, it was Minnesota's first that held the line for the nation on July 3rd, 1863, and I think we may be in that moment now." Can you comment on his rhetoric and Mayor Jacob Fry and whether they want to see unrest in Minneapolis?
Well, that's very tough rhetoric from a guy who just quit because his fraudulent activities have been uncovered. Look, Tim Walz is a joke. His entire administration has been a joke. The idea that he's some sort of freedom fighter, he's not. He's a guy who has enabled fraud and maybe, in fact, has participated in fraud. That's what this new Assistant Attorney General position is going to find out. I don't care what Tim Walz says. I care about getting to the bottom of this fraud for the American people, and I care about enforcing the nation's immigration laws. That's what we're going to stay focused on.
On a related question here, I mean, Democrats have accused ICE of murder. They've said they're targeting Americans. They've told ICE to get the F out of Minnesota. This is going to stoke the fire against ICE agents, and you're talking about ICE agents right now and being concerned about them. What, if anything, is the administration going to do to make sure these folks are protected during these protests? But also, should DHS sort of revisit their procedures here? I mean, nobody wants to see an American killed. Are there changes that need to be made to make sure something like this doesn't happen again?
Look, first of all, of course, nobody wants an American citizen to be killed. This is absolutely a tragedy, but it's a tragedy of the making of the far left. They have radicalized a very small segment of the population, taught them that ICE agents are engaging in wide-scale violation of people's rights. What our ICE officers are doing is deporting the millions of criminal aliens that were let in during the Biden administration. So number one, we have to say, as a matter of leadership, and I would appreciate if the Democrats would join me on this, let's be honest about the fact that we have way too many illegal aliens in this country. Our ICE officers should be supported in doing their job. You're trying to actually marshal the far left lunatic fringe to engage in doxing, to try to make it impossible for them to enforce the law, and in some cases actually to engage in acts of domestic terrorism against our law enforcement officers. When you talk about different plans, different protocols, different policies, I forget exactly how you asked the question. Here's the simple fact. What we're going to do is make it easier for the American people's administration to enforce the American people's law. And that means that Democrats have to stop rallying the mob against legitimate law enforcement operations. And that means that we are going to get tougher, and that's what this AAG position is about. We're going to get tougher at the people who are defrauding the United States by inciting violence against our law enforcement officers. That's one of the things that we're going to do. We've already started that work at the Department of Justice, but we're going to keep on doing it, and this new AAG position is going to kick that into high gear.
Vice President Vance, you just suggested that this woman who was killed, Renee Good, is part of a broader left-wing network. Who do you think is behind this broader left-wing network?
Well, it's one of the things we're going to have to figure out, but here's the way that I put it. When somebody throws a brick at an ICE agent, or somebody tries to run over an ICE agent, who paid for the brick? And who told protesters to show up and engage in violent activity against our law enforcement officers? You see, just with this most recent terrible incident in Minneapolis, you see friends of this woman's or other people who are eyewitnesses saying basically that she was there to engage in obstruction of a legitimate law enforcement operation. How did she get there? How did she learn about this? There's an entire network, and frankly, some of the media are participating in it, that is trying to incite violence against our law enforcement officers. It's ridiculous, it's preposterous, and part of our investigatory work is getting to the bottom of it. Who's funding it, who's supporting it, who's cheerleading it, and of course, if there's illegal activity related to that, we're going to get to the bottom of that and prosecute it where we can.
Mr. Vice President, thank you for taking questions today. Is there a risk with you describing her as a deranged leftist, talking about very specific facts of these events, when an investigation is just beginning? Are you preempting a thorough investigation by drawing such conclusions? And have you received any information beyond the videos we've seen publicly about this individual, her specific acts, that has informed your point of view?
Well, first of all, the Department of Justice is going to investigate this. The Department of Homeland Security is already investigating this. But the simple fact is, what you see is what you get in this case. You have a woman who is trying to obstruct a legitimate law enforcement operation. Nobody debates that. You have a woman who aimed her car at a law enforcement officer and pressed on the accelerator. Nobody debates that. I can believe that her death is a tragedy, while also recognizing that it's a tragedy of her own making and a tragedy of the far left, who has marshaled an entire movement, a lunatic fringe, against our law enforcement officers. I think what is clearly happening here, and it's going to keep on happening unless the Democrats wake up and say, you know what, you don't have to agree with our immigration policies, you don't have to agree with what the president or the vice president believe about immigration enforcement, but why don't you take this to the ballot box? Why don't you vote? Why don't you organize? Instead, what some of them are doing is encouraging people to get violent with our law enforcement officials. It's disgraceful, and it's got to stop.
Just to follow up on that question, and again, thank you for taking questions, Mr. Vice President. There's clearly a lot of emotion in Minnesota, across the country, over this incident. You're calling Renee Good a deranged leftist. There's been heated rhetoric that we've also heard from officials. What responsibility do you and the president have to diffuse some of the tension that we are seeing play out in Minnesota, bring down the temperature as this investigation is unfolding?
What we have a responsibility to do is to protect the people who are enforcing the law and protect the country writ large. Whether you're Democrat or Republican, you deserve to have the people's laws enforced in the United States of America. Now, again, I'm not happy that this woman lost her life. I'm not happy that this woman was there at a protest violating the law by interfering with a law enforcement action. I think that we can all recognize that the best way to turn down the temperature is to tell people to take their concerns about immigration policy to the ballot box. Stop assaulting and stop inciting violence against our law enforcement officers. That's the best way to take down the temperature. And we're not going to give in to terrorism on this. And that's exactly what's happening. People trying to antagonize, to commit acts of violence. They throw bricks at them. Sometimes they shoot at them. Sometimes they dox them. Sometimes they go to their place of residence and harass their families. This is classic terrorism. And we cannot say that when a far left fringe is inciting violence against our brave law enforcement officials, that we're no longer going to enforce the law. That's rewarding the very people who are engaged in this garbage. The actual reward that they just got is a new assistant attorney general who is going to prosecute and investigate this stuff even more aggressively than before.
Yeah. Thanks for taking my question. So the head of Minnesota's investigations agency says that the U.S. Attorney's Office has essentially cut off the state investigations agency's access to the investigation. What is the precedent for that, and why shouldn't the Minnesota officials on the ground have access and evidence to work on this investigation?
First of all, I wish the state officials in Minnesota would investigate why you have so many people who are using their vehicles and other means to actually interfere with a legitimate law enforcement operation. The precedent here is very simple. You have a federal law enforcement official engaging in federal law enforcement action. That's a federal issue. That guy is protected by absolute immunity. He was doing his job. The idea that Tim Walz and a bunch of radicals in Minneapolis are going to go after and make this guy's life miserable because he was doing the job that he was asked to do is preposterous. The unprecedented thing is the idea that a local official can actually prosecute a federal official with absolute immunity. I've never seen anything like that. It would get tossed out by a judge. So what I'd like Minnesota to focus on is the real issue, that they're encouraging people. Minneapolis officials are encouraging people to commit violence against ICE officials. It's ridiculous. It's got to stop. Go ahead.
Mr. Vice President, thank you. You said earlier
that there's a left-wing network to attack, to dox, to assault, and make it impossible for ICE officers to do their job. You told my colleague just now that there's an investigation going on into that network.
Yep.
So if everything that you say is true, how does being part of that network justify being shot?
Well, being part of the network doesn't justify being shot, but ramming an ICE officer with your car, that's what justifies being shot. It's not a good thing, by the way, but when you force somebody to engage in self-defense, it's almost a preposterous question. I'm not saying that funding some of this stuff justifies capital punishment. Nobody would suggest that. The reason this woman is dead is because she tried to ram somebody with her car and that guy acted in self-defense. That is why she lost her life, and that is the tragedy. Now, there may be other violations of the law and other penalties that are associated with those violations of the law. For example, if you are funding violence against our law enforcement officers, I'm not a prosecutor. My guess is that's not the sort of thing that earns capital punishment, but it should sure as hell earn you a few years in prison if you're funding the effort to try to assault our law enforcement officers. What is, I'm sorry guys, what's going on here? You guys are meant to report the truth. How have you let yourself become agents of propaganda of a radical fringe that's making it harder for us to enforce our laws? You just asked me a question that presumed that the reason why this woman died is because she was engaged in legitimate protest. She tried to run somebody over with her car, and the guy defended himself when that happened. Next question.
The investigation is still ongoing.
I said next question.
Mr. Vice President, I mean, you presumably watched the video yourself. There's not the slightest doubt in your mind, having viewed it, that the victim, you still believe that she deliberately tried to ram him despite seeing this video?
Look, I don't know what is in a person's heart or in a person's head, and obviously we're not going to get the chance to ask this woman what was going on. What I am certain of is that she violated the law. What I'm certain of is that that officer had every reason to think that he was under very serious threat for injury or in fact, his life. What I'm certain of is that she accelerated in a way where she ran into the guy. I don't know what was in her heart and what was in her head, but I know that she violated the law, and I know that officer was acting in self-defense. It raises an interesting point, though. Look, if people want to say that we should have a legitimate debate about, you know, what was she really doing, right? Was she panicking when she drove into this officer, or was she actually trying to ram him? That's a reasonable conversation. What's not reasonable is for so many of you to plaster all over the media that this was an innocent woman and that the ICE agent committed murder, which is what many of you have said explicitly and some of you have said implicitly. That's what I have an objection to. The idea that this was not justified is absurd, and I think everybody knows it in their heart. Yeah.
Mr. Vice President,
in the green jacket.
Taking down the temperature. It seems like political violence is ratcheting up and riots could be around the corner. What steps does the administration have planned to try to unite America? Average people on both political sides are so tired of fighting with each other, and I think all the journalists in this room could agree with me that we don't want to be part of the problem. Do you have any words to unite America?
You know, I know you don't want to be a part of the problem, and I think that's true of a lot of you. I'm not sure it's true for everybody, because the reporting over this has been one of the biggest scandals I've ever seen in media. I've never seen a case so misrepresented and misreported when you have a guy who is defending himself and is now being treated as some sort of federal assassin by so many of the people in this room. First of all, let me say about crime. You mentioned violence. One of the things we're proudest about is that you saw violent crime over the last year drop by 20%. Why is that drop by 20%? Is it because we're attacking our law enforcement officers, or is it because we in the administration are empowering our law enforcement officers to enforce the law? I think that's one of the ways you take down the temperature, is you make people feel more secure and safe in their person and property. That's why we care so much about protecting our law enforcement, because it accrues to the benefit of the entire national community. I think that we can absolutely talk about the ways in which, you know, we can lower the temperature by discussing differences in a reasonable and rational way. Again, I'm happy to talk with any congressional Democrat or any of you about our immigration policy, about why I think it's necessary, about why I think it's in the best interest of the country, about why the President of the United States was elected to actually enforce the border for the first time in at least 4 years. So here's the problem. That's not the debate so many people are having. They are actively covering for people who are committing acts of violence against federal law enforcement. It is preposterous. The way to take down the temperature is to stop it. Have your debates about policy. Attack me. Attack the President of the United States. Don't attack our law enforcement officers. They are trying to do the job the American people demanded that they do. They are not policy actors. They are enforcing the law. They should be treated with a modicum of dignity and respect. And the fact that they're not is why incidents like yesterday happened. The one final point I'll make about this is, look, there's a part of me that feels very, very sad for this woman, not just because she lost her life, but because I think she is a victim of left-wing ideology. What young mother shows up and decides they're going to throw their car in front of ICE officers who are enforcing legitimate law? You've got to be a little brainwashed to get to that point to where you're willing not just to protest, that's fine, not peacefully protest, but throw your vehicle in front of legitimate law enforcement officers and drive your car into them. To get to that point, you have to be, I think, radicalized in a very, very sad way. I certainly wish that she hadn't got there. I know there's an ICE officer right now who very much wishes he was not put in the position where he had to fire a gun to defend his own life. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. What's your message, following up on that, what's your message to the leaders in Minnesota, the governor of Minnesota, the mayor of Minneapolis, to calm down the situation on the ground, on the streets? What's your message also to those protesters who saw that video in a completely different way than you saw that video?
Well, first of all, I think if you watch every angle of that video, there is one angle where if you squint, you can maybe tell yourself that it's not clear what happened. But when you look at all angles of that video, it is very clear that her vehicle went right for the guy. She actually collided with him, and then that's, of course, when he fired his shots. That's obvious, okay? So what I'd say to the protesters is, by all means, protest peacefully, but make this about ideas. Make this about disagreement with our policy. Don't use your protest as a justification or an encouragement for people to go and incite violence and participate in violence against our law enforcement officials. To the people on the ground in Minneapolis, meaning the local officials in Minneapolis, from Tim Walz on down, I'd say, look, why can't you just disagree with a given piece of immigration policy without turning law enforcement into the enemy? And think about, for example, a criminal law, where a police officer goes and arrests somebody because they violated a criminal law. If you're mad about that, go and protest the politician who passed that law. Don't attack the police officer who's just doing their job. We had a wide open border under Joe Biden. I happen to think it's a good thing the President of the United States has closed it down. If you think that's a bad idea, criticize this administration for a policy decision. Don't attack our people for enforcing the law, because I guarantee you go to ICE, there are black people and white people, there are Democrats and Republicans, they are patriotic Americans who are trying to enforce the law. Attack me, lay off of our ICE agents. Yeah, in the blue, all the way, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Vice President. You called on Tim Walz to resign. Can you lay out the case as to why he should step down?
Well, look, I think Tim Walz should resign because it's very clear either that he knew about the fraud in Minneapolis, he knew about the welfare fraud, or at the very least he looked the other way. I mean, this is not this is not like Lex Luthor, right? This is not movie villain fraud. This is the lowest IQ possible fraud. This is, we're going to take we're going to take the absence of kids and set up a daycare center where there are no children, and we're going to call our early childhood education center the Quality Learning Center. By the way, if you can't spell learning, maybe you shouldn't be in early childhood education. But people got rich off of this. We know that there were schools who either had no enrollment or at least they overstated their enrollment. Tim Walz, either it was unbelievable incompetence or he was in on the fraud. That's one of the things we're going to get to the bottom of. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Can you explain the difference between this Associate Attorney General and a special counsel? And do you envision this being a permanent position or having more of a limited scope?
Well, it's going to be permanent until we get to the bottom of what's going on, so I think it's going to last for at least the remainder of the administration. What's different about it from a special counsel is, if you remember, the Jack Smith case where the special counsel was found unconstitutional, one of the big issues there is that that person was not an appointed person completely aside from all the other issues that the person was a lunatic and that the case had no merit, there was a fundamental constitutional issue, which is that he had not been appointed by the president and he had not been confirmed by the United States Senate. An assistant attorney general, what that's going to allow us to do is appoint this person, have them confirmed by the Senate. That's one difference. The more substantive difference is that this person is going to be part of a very broad interagency White House that's being led from the President of the United States on down, and that's going to give him the resources, the access to material and information to make this person more effective. I think a lot of people have asked, how are you really going to get to the heart of the fraud? We've been asking ourselves that question for the past couple of months, and we think this is the critical piece at the Department of Justice to really ramp this fraud investigation into high gear. In the red tie, yeah.
Vice President Vance, I wanted to ask, what's your message to far leftist agitators who feel emboldened to obstruct ICE activity in Minnesota and around the country?
Well, I think they shouldn't feel emboldened because now they have an assistant attorney general who is going to prosecute and investigate their fraud and their violence more aggressively than it has ever been investigated in the United States of America. We are doing so much to try to find the financing networks and the domestic terrorism networks that legitimate this violence, that fund this violence, and that, of course, engage in the violence. These people should not feel emboldened because they have, for the first time, maybe in American history, an administration that is not going to tolerate political violence of any kind from anywhere.
Yeah. We made clear today that the entire weight of the federal government is behind these ICE agents and this ICE agent in particular. There is still a federal investigation happening on the ground. Does that mean that they are not looking into this ICE agent at all? They are just focused on the woman who was in the car? What is the investigation if the federal government has already determined that its weight is behind this ICE investigation?
So what do you mean when you say investigation? Do you mean investigation of the shooting yesterday or of the fraud that's happening in Minneapolis?
Yesterday.
Okay, look, DHS, as I understand it, has an investigation already ongoing. I know that other organs of our government are looking at this. So yes, there is certainly an investigation that's happening right now. But as part of the broader fraud investigation, a lot of what we're doing with the Department of Justice has already started. We've got over 1,500 subpoenas. We've got people this morning, actually. We're going door to door to actually knock on some of these fraudulent care centers, these fraudulent social services organizations to get to the bottom of what's going on there. So the investigation in some ways has already been ramping up into the anti-fraud element for at least a few weeks. What we're trying to do is supercharge it and make sure there's a designated person within the Department of Justice who completely controls that particular focus.
Just to follow up on that, Mr. Vice President, on the agent, is he still on duty or has he been placed on leave, on administrative leave? And what really was the target of the operation on Wednesday? ICE operation on Wednesday?
Well, first of all, it was a legitimate law enforcement operation. We were going door to door to try to find criminal illegal aliens and deport them from the United States of America, because if you come to our country illegally in violation of our immigration laws, then we have the mandate, and in fact we have the legal duty to enforce those immigration laws. Whether he's been placed on administrative leave, I don't know the answer to that question. I'd refer it to the Department of Homeland Security and they can follow up. I will say, look, I would appreciate everybody saying a prayer for that agent. Look, in the past 6 months, he has been hit twice by a motor vehicle. One time, the first time, it led to over 30 stitches and very serious injuries to his legs. This is a guy who's actually done a very, very important job for the United States of America. He's been assaulted, he's been attacked, he's been injured because of it. He deserves a debt of gratitude, and I think the media prejudging and talking about this guy as if he's a murderer is one of the most disgraceful things I've ever seen from the American media. Yeah.
Vice President, what is your specific role in the future of Venezuela? And I'm wondering, could you confirm reports that the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, was kept out of the planning for the operations because of her past concerns about military involvement in Venezuela?
So I've heard a couple of things. One, that I was kept out of the planning for the Venezuela operation, that's false. And another, that Tulsi was kept out of the planning for Venezuela operations, that's completely false. Look, we're all part of the same team. And one of the things that is really amazing about that operation is that we kept it very tight to the senior cabinet level officials and related officials in our government. And we kept this operation secret for a very long time. I'm very proud of that. I think it suggests that the team works very well together. Well, looking ahead, what is my role? Look, my role is going to be whatever the president asks me to do. Well, every single, or I should say every other day, I'm chairing the meeting that we do on this among White House principals to talk about next steps to try to ensure that Venezuela is stable, and as the president has directed us to do, to ensure that the new Venezuelan government actually listens to the United States and does what the United States needs it to do under our country's best interest. So I'm going to be as involved as the president wants me to be. So far, that's been very involved, and I'll keep on doing that so long as the president asks me to do it. In the purple.
Yes.
Even
Mr.
beyond the war powers
Sorry,
resolution.
we'll go purple, and then we'll go pink, or whatever that is in front.
Royal purple. And then beige. All right. Okay. Are there any indications, you talked about the network, are there any indications that the lady who was shot, I know there are different reports from there, her wife said they were new to the area. Are there any indications she may have been a paid agitator, and maybe that there are others that were brought to the area, considering everything that's going on in Minneapolis?
I wouldn't say that she was paid. I don't have the evidence to say that one way or the other. What I do know is that she was violating the law, and if you just look at the eyewitness accounts, they were saying she was there to prevent the enforcement of the law. She was trying to obstruct a legitimate law enforcement operation. That much is obviously clear. The rest of it, of course, is part of the reason why we investigate this stuff. Yeah.
Mr. Vice President, even beyond the war powers resolution today, Congress has bucked President Trump on issues like tariffs. Are you concerned that President Trump is losing his grip on Republicans in the Congress, and what are you going to do about it?
No, I'm not concerned at all. First of all, we talked to some of the senators who were going to vote the wrong way, in my view, on this resolution today. Much of their argument was based more on a legal technicality than any disagreement in policy. If you look at the people who actually voted, every single one of them have supported the administration's plan. Second of all, as the president, I believe himself, has already said, every president, Democrat or Republican, believes the War Powers Act is fundamentally a fake and unconstitutional law. It's not going to change anything about how we conduct foreign policy over the next couple of weeks, the next couple of months, and that'll continue to be how we approach things. Go ahead.
President. So we are seeing, regarding Iran, we are seeing the protests in Iran these days. The cities are begging for help from the U.S. and Israel, naming streets in the city after President Trump. It seems there is an opportunity here that may not come again. Will the United States stand by the citizens of Iran? And if Israel decides to strike again the nuclear sites in Iran, is the U.S. expected to take part?
Well, look, we certainly stand by anybody who's engaged in peaceful protest, anybody who's trying to exert their rights for free association and to have their voices heard. Obviously, the Iranian regime has a lot of problems, and as the President of the United States has said, the smartest thing for them to have done, it was true 2 months ago, it's true today, is for them to actually have a real negotiation with the United States about what we need to see when it comes to their nuclear program. I'll let the President speak to what we're going to do in the future, but we certainly stand with anybody across the world, including the Iranian people who are advocating for their rights. I'll take just a couple more questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Concerning Venezuela, how would you assure the Caribbean region that they will remain a zone of peace? Because some member states in the region are concerned.
Well, look, the President had a very productive phone call with the President of Colombia yesterday, and we continue to talk at all levels of government with a number of our friends in the Caribbean region. I actually think this is really good for peace in the Caribbean, because when you take away a major source of illegal cartel revenue, which is the cocaine trade, the fentanyl trade, other sources of illicit revenue, you actually remove the power of one of the main destabilizing forces in Latin America and in the Caribbean. I really do think, look, we say it all the time, this is the President of Peace. One of the ways that you establish peace in your own hemisphere is to make it clear that the United States is going to be respected, that the United States is willing to take power away from criminal cartel organizations and give it to legitimate governments. That's how we see the future of the Western Hemisphere, and we think it's going to be much more peaceful than it was certainly under Joe Biden. I'll take one more question. Go ahead.
Mr. Vice President, thank you. On Greenland, do you have a message for European leaders? Many in Europe reject the idea that the island could be for sale.
Well, first of all, Secretary Rubio, I believe, is meeting with the leaders of Denmark and Greenland next week, I want to say it is, but maybe it's the week after that. We'll continue to deliver some of these messages in private, some of them in public, but I guess my advice to European leaders and anybody else would be to take the President of the United States seriously. What has he said about Greenland? Set to the side the crazy overreactions that I've seen from the press and from certain people in Europe. What has the President said? Number one, Greenland is really important, not just to America's missile defense, but to the world's missile defense. Number two, we know that there are hostile adversaries that have shown a lot of interest in that particular territory, that particular slice of the world. So what we're asking our European friends to do is to take the security of that landmass more seriously, because if they're not, the United States is going to have to do something about it. What that is, I'll leave that to the President as we continue to engage in diplomacy with our European friends and everybody on this particular topic. And again, thank you all for listening. Thanks for taking questions. And I just ask you, look, this is politics, and often Republicans and get in arguments with the press about things. And I understand that. I think it's really irresponsible for you guys to go out there and imply or tell the American people that a guy who defended himself from being rammed by an automobile is guilty of murder. Be a little bit more careful. We're going to talk about toning down the temperature, which I know the President wants to do, and I certainly want to do. One of the ways we tone down the temperature is to have a media that tells the truth. I encourage you all to do that. God bless you.
U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance speaking at the White House, describing what he believes to be the truth about what happened yesterday. This is following the death of 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good. She died after being shot by a law enforcement officer. J.D. Vance saying that the woman aimed her car at a law enforcement officer. Her death is a tragedy of her own making. He also said, I don't know what was in this person's head or heart, but the officer thought his life was in danger, and I know that she violated the law. The CBC's Chris Reyes has been listening in from New York. Chris, just your thoughts on what we heard there from the U.S. Vice President.
Yeah, I mean, that was a fiery, accusation-laden, extensive statement from J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, ardently defending the actions of an ICE agent that shot and killed a 37-year-old woman yesterday. I mean, where do we start, Andrew? Let's be the calm head that makes sense of that fiery, extensive statement. I mean, I think what we heard there were some pretty hard conclusions from Vice President Vance, and that conclusion is that this woman tried to run over an ICE agent and that the officer had every reason to think that he was under threat. Vice President Vance took issue with a headline that represented this story as an ICE agent firing at and killing a 37-year-old woman, which is about as factual a line as you can get. But he said that implies that this was not an act of self-defense. He said that according to eyewitness accounts, his conclusion, and you know, he made a pretty hard argument that this should be everybody's conclusions, even before any kind of investigation can take place, is that she was there to get in the way of ICE agents. And as you mentioned, he said that was a tragedy, but a tragedy of her own making. I mean, we have to mention here that this is a dueling narrative from all of the other officials involved in this case, including from the governor of Minnesota and the mayor of Minneapolis, who called that argument yesterday as BS and, you know, used another pretty strong term to tell ICE agents to get out of the city. I mean, I think sometimes we use the word polarization a little too much, but there's just really no word to describe the dialogue that happens in this country on a moment-to-moment basis. It is as if these different officials are living in completely different realities when they're watching the same thing. Now, we just listened to Vice President Vance, but I want you to listen to what Governor Tim Walz had to say, because his concern is that these hard conclusions are happening even before an independent investigation can take place. Have a listen to what he said.
Feels now that Minnesota has been taken out of the investigation, it feels very, very difficult that we will get a fair outcome. And I say that only because people in positions of power have already passed judgment, from the president to the vice president to Kristi Noem, have stood and told you things that are verifiably false, verifiably inaccurate. They have determined the character of a 37-year-old mom that they didn't even know.
And Kristi Noem, the Department of Homeland and Security head, accusing this woman, Renee Good, of being a domestic terrorist. Now, the question here is what will become of this investigation and who will be a part of it, and what kind of results will come out of that investigation given who will handle it. J.D. Vance also went extensively, Andrew, into this idea that this is all part of a left-wing movement that needs to be stamped out of this country. And, you know, this builds on a task force that President Trump assembled late last year, talking about this kind of domestic terrorism and how much evidence they had how much evidence they had to kind of speak to what happens in these protests. And their argument and their allegation is that this is funded by organized left-wing movements. All of these things are accusations and allegations, and you know, we're left in the middle of all of it, Andrew, to try to make sense what is actually a fact and what is not, and it's all happening in real time. And frankly, very difficult to make sense of what's real and what's not based on the dueling narratives and the dueling facts that's being presented by different officials of the U.S. government.
And Chris, we should also mention, there was a commitment to having an assistant attorney general looking into fraud, cracking down on all of this, saying we're going to get tougher against people inciting violence against law enforcement officers. And then some strong language that he used against the media, saying the media have been irresponsible in the reporting of this, generally speaking.
That's right. I mean, I think he spent about as much time, talking about how the media are not doing their job. Again, despite the fact that some of these, headlines are about as factual as you can get. But the argument from Vice President Vance is that they're missing context, and they're missing parts of the story that would more accurately represent what happened. So, for example, with this particular ICE agent, he repeatedly kept mentioning the fact that he was previously injured in the line of duty. And he didn't feel that was being represented enough in the media, and that instead, in those headlines, what was being implied is this ICE agent essentially shot and killed this woman. This woman was shot. That's a fact, and she died from her injuries after she was shot. That is also a fact. But again, he spent a lot of time talking about how this story is being represented and how those stories are being used to fuel what he accused to be a part of this sort of left-wing movement or ideology to go against the work of ICE agents. And Vice President Vance said that, you can argue against their immigration policy, but do not get in the way of the work of their ICE agents or law enforcement. And that is where they draw a hard line of defending their law enforcement.
Chris, thank you. The CBC's Chris Reyes, live in New York. In Minneapolis today, demonstrations have erupted over the fatal shooting of Renee Good. This is video from outside a federal building. Protesters shouted and swore at law enforcement officers. Scuffles also broke out. Agents restrained some demonstrators and also fired pepper balls at others. Meanwhile, a memorial is growing at the site where an ICE agent shot and killed Renee Good yesterday. Local and state officials in Minnesota say the shooting was unjustified. But as we heard during Vice President J.D. Vance's briefing moments ago, Trump administration officials are defending the agent, saying Good was using her vehicle as a weapon. And here's a reminder of yesterday's deadly incident as it played out on camera. The video is not graphic, but some viewers may find it disturbing. You can see an SUV there on the right and a pickup truck approach on the left. ICE agents get out of that pickup and order 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good out of her vehicle. She reverses, then pulls forward and to the right. 3 shots ring out. Some witnesses said Good was trying to avoid the agent, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says Good tried to hit the officer in an act of domestic terrorism. Let's take you live to the scene in Minneapolis now. Stephen Rommel is a correspondent for NBC News, and he joins us now. And Stephen, what was the mood there? What has the mood there been like there today in the aftermath of what happened yesterday?
Yeah, Andrew, as you can imagine, people are upset over this. This is the same neighborhood where Good was shot and killed yesterday. It's become a natural gathering place for these demonstrators. They do sometimes start chanting for ICE to leave the area, those types of things. But for the most part, it has been very calm. Things have been not at all what we saw earlier. You showed a video of what was happening outside a federal building, where federal agents clashed with some protesters there. At least 2 people appeared to have been taken into custody. That has not been the case here in the neighborhood where the incident actually happened. We have learned a bit more about Renee Good today, that she was 37 years old, as we learned yesterday, married, a mother, a U.S. citizen. The paper here was able to speak to her mother, who said she was the best person that she ever knew. It's a much different picture that we're getting from federal officials here in the United States, saying that that there is an investigation ongoing, but we heard from Vice President J.D. Vance, along with Secretary Noem, seeming to already say that this was an act of domestic terrorism, and they're saying that Good was trying to strike this agent. So it's unclear what the investigation is looking into when that seems to already have been concluded here, something that has upset many of the people who have gathered here to protest. Many people in the city of Minneapolis upset that it seems like the investigation is a closed case right now, that they've already decided the outcome of that investigation. And that tension continues here right now, though things where we are peaceful. Andrew?
And Stephen, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension said it was told it would no longer have access to evidence or case materials. What does that mean in terms of who's investigating this incident?
Yeah, a great question. That essentially means that the state of Minnesota, they have been shut out of this investigation without access to evidence and materials. It's impossible for them to conduct a thorough investigation, meaning that the Department of Justice is now investigating, the FBI is investigating, and Homeland Security also appears to be investigating, but it's unclear what they're looking into. As we heard from J.D. Vance not long ago, there are multiple angles of video. It seems as though he seemed to imply that he's seen those angles and has still come to the conclusion that Renee Good was intentionally trying to ram this agent, and that the agent fired in self-defense. And it's unclear what the investigation is looking at if they have already decided that information, which is why we heard from Minnesota Governor Tim Walz earlier today saying that Minnesota needs to be a part of this investigation. I was able to speak to people out in Minneapolis earlier today saying that they just do not trust the federal government to essentially investigate itself. One woman told me that it seems like the Trump administration is just investigating the Trump administration. They would really like Minnesota to be involved in that, but as things seem to be right now, that is just not the case.
And there are tributes to the woman who was killed. How is Renee Nicole Good being remembered today?
Yeah, there are sort of spontaneous areas where there are makeshift tributes to Renee Good. As I mentioned earlier, she's a U.S. citizen, a mom, and her mother was able to speak to the local paper here in Minneapolis, saying that she's the best person she knew. The Minneapolis City Council said that she died protecting her neighbors. That's how they described her. It's a very different picture that we're getting from people like Vice President J.D. Vance, who said that she's was corrupted by left-wing ideology. It's a very different picture that we're getting here on the ground compared to what we're hearing from federal officials, and I think that is also leading in to some of the tension we're feeling here today, Andrew.
Stephen, thank you. Stephen Romo of NBC News reporting live from Minneapolis. And a reminder of our top story this hour. Protests continue in Minneapolis in response to yesterday's shooting of a 37-year-old woman by an immigration enforcement agent. Officials and many people in the state are outraged. In a briefing a short time ago, Vice President J.D. Vance said the agent's actions were justified. We'll have more details on the story and the victim after the break. Stay with us. You're watching CBC News Network.